Testing?
Testing.
Okay, good. Mic works. Okay, so today is Tuesday, the 17th of September 2024. Time is 4:24. Um, so last time I was streaming this, um, I streamed for about two hours, about 2.5 hours, and then there was a connection issue with OBS, and I did manage to reconnect it, but then I thought, I'll have to leave in an hour, so there'd be no point, you know, uh, streaming for just an extra hour. Um, so, the first stream went well. There's no warnings or anything, so I was a bit nervous doing a reading stream because I'd never seen anybody do a reading stream before. So I wasn't sure if this type of thing was allowed. Um, so yeah. So I'll just continue where I left off. It's a shame because I was trying to do like two chapters per stream, and when the connection dropped, I was like almost finished with chapter one. Okay, so I'm going to continue where I left off with Halo the Flood by William C. Dietz. So if you enjoy the stream and you like listening to the story and you'd like to buy a copy of the book, there's the covers of the book on the screen there. If you want to use Google to try and find them, you should be able to. If you want to support the author or anything, you should be able to find the books on like Amazon or in a local bookstore or wherever. So you should be able to find them somewhere. There's probably digital versions as well. Okay, so hopefully if this first reading stream goes well, I'll do more reading streams. I would like to do the Resident Evil series. So my idea for that is I'd be playing the game and then reading the novel associated with it, and then doing the next game and then reading the next novels and so on. So there's like seven Resident Evil novels by S.D. Perry. So I want to read those, in between playing each of the Resident Evil games, which I think would be really cool because, it goes into a lot of details, those books, which will be really cool. Okay, so I'm continuing where I left off, with so in the last section it switched from Master Chief's point of view to back to an alien called Nosuli, who is like one of the grunts, I think, one of the grunt type aliens for the Covenant. Just gonna put up my stream manager. There we go. Right, so in fact, based on the manner in which the other humans interacted with him, Nosili felt certain that the man named Keys held the position of shipmaster, a very valuable prize indeed. But how to capture the human? He wouldn't come willingly, that was obvious, and his companions were armed. The moment Nosili deactivated his camouflage, they would shoot him Individually, the humans were weaklings, but they were dangerous in packs, and animals grew all the more dangerous the nearer they came to extinction. No patience was no patience was the key, which meant that the elite would have to wait. The vapor continued to roll out of the cold air vent, and the air seemed to shimmer, but no one noticed. "All right," Key said. "Let's put her down. Stand by to fire the bow thrusters." Fire. The bow thrusters ignited and slowed the ship's rate of descent. The Pillar of Autumn wobbled for a moment as it battled the ring's gravity field, then corrected its angle of entry. Cortana took over after that, or rather, the part of herself that she had left behind did. The Autumn's thrusters fired in increments so small that they were like single notes in an ongoing melody. The highly adaptive subroutine tracked variables, monitored feedback, and made thousands of decisions per second. The much abused hull shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, started to shake, and sent a host of loose items tumbling to the deck. "That's as far as we can take her," Keyes announced. "Delegate all command and control functions to Cortana's cousin, and let's haul ass off this boat." There was a ragged chorus of aye ayes as the bridge crew disengaged from the ship they had worked so hard to save, took one last look around, and drew their sidearms. The fighting had died down, but that didn't mean all of the Covenant forces had left. Nosily watched anxiously as the humans started to leave the bridge. He waited for the last person to exit and fell into step behind. The beginnings of a plan had started to form in his mind. It was audacious. No, make that outrageous. But the elite figured that made the scheme all the more likely to succeed. Right, so Nosily must be... So yeah, so it said there Nosily is an elite, so that must be one of the types of alien species that you play as in Halo 2. Because there were parts of Halo 2 where it would switch between playing as the Master Chief and playing as one of the Covenant. The lifeboat reserved for the bridge crew was close by. 6 Marines had been detailed to guard it, and 3 of them were dead. Their bodies had been dragged off to one side and laid in a row. A corporal shouted, "Attention on deck," Key said, "as you were," and gestured toward the hatch. "Thanks for waiting, son. I'm sorry about your buddies." The corporal nodded stiffly. He must have been off duty when the attack began. One half of his face needed a shave. "Thank you, sir. They took a dozen of the bastards with them." Keyes nodded. 3 lives for 12. It sounded like a good trade-off, but how good was it really? How many Covenant troops were there anyway? And how many would each human have to kill? He shook the thought off and jerked his thumb toward the opening. "Everybody into the boat. On the double." So yeah, I've got some bookmarks on the way. I do have one bookmark on my shelf there, but I can't use that one because a friend got to me. She's from Spain, so she gave it to me as a gift from her hometown. So yeah, can't use that one. So I've been using my jam card. Just a minute. Please be patient. I have autism. So yeah, I bring that everywhere with me, and yeah, apparently I'm supposed to like show this to like bus drivers and whatever, or if anybody is giving me a hard time, I just show that, and Hopefully they'll realise I have a disability and cool off or something. The survivors streamed onto the boat, and Nosely followed, though it was difficult to avoid touching the human vermin in such tight quarters. There was little bit of space toward the front and the handhold, which would be useful once the gravity generated by the larger ship disappeared. Later, after the lifeboat landed, the elite would find an opportunity to separate Keyes from the rest of the humans and seize him. In the meantime, all he had to do was hang on, avoid detection, and make it to the surface. The human passengers strapped in. The lifeboat exploded out of the bay, and it fell toward the ring world below. Jets fired. The small craft stabilized and followed a pre-calculated glide path toward the surface. Keyes was seated 3 slots aft of the pilot. He frowned, as if looking for something, then waited for the boat to clear. He leaned toward the Marine in front of him. "Excuse me, Corporal." "Sir?" The Marine looked exhausted, but somehow managed to snap a form of attention, despite being belted into an acceleration chair. "Hand me your sidearm, son." The expression on his face made it plain that the last thing the soldier wanted to do was part company with one of his weapons, particularly in close quarters. But the captain was the captain, so he had very little choice. The words, "Yes, sir," were still making their way from the non-com's brain to his mouth when he felt the M60 pistol being jerked out of his holster. Would one of the 12.7mm rounds punch its way through the lifeboat's relatively thin hull? Keyes wondered. Cause a blowout and kill everyone aboard? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. The covenant son of a bitch standing in this lifeboat was about to die. Keyes raised the weapon, aimed at the very centre of the strange ghostly shimmer, and pulled the trigger. The elite saw the movement, had nowhere to run, and was busy reaching for his own pistol when the first bullet struck. The M6D bucked, the barrel started to rise, and the third slug from the top of the clip passed through the slit in Nosely's helmet, blew his brains out through the back of his skull, and freed him from the tyranny of physical reality. No sooner had the noise of the last shot died away than the camo generator failed, and an elite appeared as if from thin air. The alien's body floated back toward the rear of the cabin. Thousands of globules of alien blood escorted bits of brain tissue on their journey to the lifeboat's stern. Lieutenant Hikawa ducked as one of the elite's boots threatened to hit her head. She pushed the corpse away, her face impassive. The rest of the passengers were too shocked to do or say anything at all. The captain calmly dropped the clip from the gun, ejected the round in the chamber, and handed the weapon back to the stunned corporal. "Thanks," Key said. "That thing works pretty well. Don't forget to reload it." Section 2. Halo. Chapter 2. Deployment. Plus 00 hours, 03 minutes, 24 seconds. Major Silva mission clock. Command HEV in combat drop to surface of Halo. Consistent with the standard UNSC insertion protocols, Major Antonio Silva's HEV accelerated once it was launched so that it was among the first to enter Halo's atmosphere. There were a number of reasons for this, including the strongly held belief that officers should lead rather than follow, be willing to do anything their troops were asked to do, and expose themselves to the same level of danger. There were still other reasons, however, beginning with the need to collect, sort, and organize the troops the moment their boots touched the ground. Experience demonstrated that whatever the hell jumpers managed to accomplish during the first so-called golden hour would have a disproportionate effect on the success or failure of the entire mission, especially now as the Marines dropped into a hostile world without any of the intel briefings, virtual reality sims or environment-specific equipment mods they would normally receive prior to such an insertion. To offset this, the command pod was equipped with a lot of gear that the regular eggs weren't, including some high-powered imaging gear and the classy military AI required to operate it. This particular intelligence had been programmed with a male persona, the name Wellesley, after the famous Duke of Wellington, and a personality to match. Though he was a good deal less capable than a top level AI like Cortana, all of Wellesley's capabilities were focused on things military, which made him extremely useful if somewhat narrow minded. The HEV shook violently and flipped end for end as the interior temperature rose to 98 degrees. Sweat poured down Silva's face. "So," Wesley continued, his voice coming in via the officer's earplugs, "based on the telemetry available from space, plus my analysis, it appears that the structure tagged as HS-2604 will meet your needs." The AI's tone changed slightly as a conversational subroutine kicked in. "Perhaps you would like to call it Gawalagugar, after the fortress I conquered in India." "Thanks," Silva croaked as the pod inverted a second time. "But no thanks. First, you didn't take the fortress. Wellington did. Second, there weren't any computers in 1803. Third, none of my troops would be able to pronounce Gawalgur. The designator alphabase will do just fine." The AI issued a possible rendition of a human sigh. "Very well then, as I was saying, alphabase is located at the tip of this butt. The curvilinear screen, located just 6 inches from the end of the Marine's nose, seemed to shiver, and the video morphed into a picture of a thick, pillar-like formation topped by a mesa with some variegated, flat-roofed structures located at one end. That was all Silva got to see before the HEV's skin started to slow away, revealing the alloy crash cage that contained the officer and his equipment. The air turned cold and ripped at his clothes. A moment later, the chute unfurled and assumed the shape of an airfoil. Silva winced as the pod decelerated with a bone-rattling jerk. His harness bit into his shoulders and chest. Wesley sent an electronic signal to the rest of the Helljumpers. The remaining of their HEVs turned in whatever direction was necessary in order to orient themselves on the command pod and follow it down through the atmosphere. All except for Private Marie Postley, who heard a snap as her main chute tore away. There was a sickening moment of freefall, then a jolt as the backup chute deployed. A red light flashed on the instrument panel in front of her. She started to scream on frequency 2 until Silva cut her off. He closed his eyes. It was the death that every hell jumper feared, but none of them talked about. Somewhere, down toward Halo's surface, Postley was about to dig her own grave. Silva felt his HEV stabilize and took another look at the butt. It was tall enough to provide anyone who owned it with a good view of the surrounding countryside, plus the sheer cliffs would force attackers to either come by air or fight their way up along narrow paths. As a bonus, the structures located on top would provide his Marines with defensible shelter. "It looks good. I like it." "I thought you would," Wellesley replied smugly. "There is one little problem, however." "What's that?" Silva shouted as the last section of the HEV's skin peeled away and the slipstream tore at his mask. "The Covenant owns this particular piece of real estate," the AI replied calmly, "and if we want it, we'll have to take it." Deployment plus 00 hours 02 minutes 51 seconds. Spartan 117 mission clock. Lifeboat Lima Foxtrot Alpha 43. An emergency descent to surface of Halo. The Master Chief watched the ring open up in front of him as the pilot guided the lifeboat in past a thick, slivery edge. and down under the construct's inner surface before putting the tiny ship into a shallow dive calculated to place it on the strange landscape below. As he looked forward, he saw mountains, hills, and a plain that curved up and eventually out of focus as the ring swooped upward to complete itself somewhere over his head. The sight was beautiful, strange, and disorienting all at the same time. Then the sightseeing was over as the ground came up to meet them. The Master Chief couldn't tell whether the lifeboat took enemy fire, suffered an engine failure, or nicked an obstacle on final approach. It really didn't matter. The result was the same. The pilot had time to yell, We're coming in too fast. A moment later, the hull bounced off something solid, and the Spartan was knocked off his feet. Pain stabbed through his temples as his helmet slammed into the bulkhead on his way to the deck plates, followed by clinging blackness. Chief, can you hear me? Cortana's voice echoed in his head. The Spartan opened his eyes and found himself facing the overhead light panels. They flickered and sparked. Yes, I can hear you, he replied. There's no need to shout. Oh, really? The AI replied in an arch tone. Maybe you'll like to file a complaint with the Covenant. The crash triggered a lot of radio traffic, and it's my guess that the welcome wagon is on the way. The Master Chief struggled to his feet and was just about to answer in kind when he saw the bodies. The impact of the crash had ripped the boat open and mangled the unprotected people within. No one else had survived. There was no time to dwell on that, not if he wanted to stay alive and keep Cortana from falling into enemy hands. He hurried to gather as much ammo, grenades, and supplies as he could carry. He had just finished checking the pins on a quartet of frag grenades when Cortana piped up in alarm. Warning, I've detected multiple Covenant dropships on approach. I recommend moving into those hills. If we're lucky, the Covenant will believe that everyone aboard the lifeboat died in the crash. Acknowledged. Cortana's plan made sense. The Spartans surveyed the area for threats, then hurried toward a canyon and the bridge that crossed it. The span was devoid of safety railings and was constructed from strange burnished metal. Beneath the bridge, a towering waterfall thundered down a massive drop-off. The rest of the world arched high overhead. Large outcroppings of weather-smoothed grey rock rose ahead, and a scattering of what looked like conifers reminded him of the forest he'd trained in on Reach. There were differences, however, like the way the ring toppered up from the horizon, the manner in which its shadow fell upon the land, and the crisp, clean air that came in through his filters. It was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but potentially dangerous as well. Alert, Covenant dropship inbound. Cortana's voice was calm but insistent. The prophecy soon proved correct, as a large shadow floated over the far end of the bridge, and the ship's engines screamed a warning. There was very little doubt that the Spartan had been spotted, so he made plans to deal with it. He reached the end of the bridge, saw a likely-looking boulder off to his left, and hurried to take advantage of it. He skirted the cliff edge, ignoring the long drop. Careful to watch his footing, the Master Chief circled the rock and found a crevice where the boulder touched the cliff. Now, with his back to the wall, he had a chance to defend himself. He checked his motion tracker and realized that a pair of Covenant Banshees were practically on top of him. The alien aircraft boasted plasma cannon and fuel-rod guns. Though not especially fast, they were still dangerous, especially against ground troops. Combined with air support, the grunts and elites that dropped from the fork-shaped alien troop carrier were a serious threat. He steadied his aim and sighted on the nearest Banshee, careful not to fire early. The Spartan waited for the Banshee to come within range, then squeezed the trigger. The first assault ship came straight at him, which made it relatively easy to stay on target. Bullet impacts sparked on the Banshee's hull as his ammo counter dwindled. The ship shuddered as at least some of the armor-piercing rounds penetrated the fuselage, pulled up out of its dive, and started to trail smoke. The Master Chief was in no position to appreciate the results of his efforts, however, as the second Banshee swooped out of the sun, pounded the area around him with plasma fire. His shield display dropped and then pulsed red. An alarm whined in his helmet speakers. The Master Chief returned fire. Without pause, he thumbed the magazine release and slammed a fresh clip into the receiver. He crouched, searched the sky for targets, and spotted Banshee number 1 in the nick of time. He braced himself for another assault. The Spartan allowed the enemy aircraft to approach, took a slight lead, and squeezed the trigger again. The Covenant ship ran into the stream of bullets, exploded into flames, and slammed into the cliff wall. The second ship was still up there, flying in lazy circles, but the Spartan knew better than to stand around and watch it. A half-dozen red dots had appeared on his motion sensors. Each blip represented a potential assailant, and most were located to his rear. The Master Chief waited for his shields to return to their full charge, then turned, jumped up onto the boulder, and took a quick look around. The Covenant dropship had deposited a clutch of grunts on the far side of the canyon, where they were busy examining the wreckage of his lifeboat. But that wasn't all. To his left, on the side of the bridge, another group of grunts was working its way through the trees, moving in his direction. They were still a ways off, however, which gave him a few seconds to prepare. Though not armed with standard S2AM sniper's rifle, his weapon of choice for this sort of situation, the Spartan was packing the M6D pistol that Keyes had given him. It was equipped with a 2x scope, and, in the hands of an expert, it could reach out and touch someone. The Master Chief drew the sidearm, turned to the group gathered around the wreckage, and placed a targeting circle over the nearest grunt. In spite of the fact that they were of no immediate threat, the aliens on the other side of the canyon were in an ideal position to flank him, which meant he would deal with them first. 12 shots rang out, and 7 grunts fell. Satisfied that his right flank was reasonably secure, he slammed a fresh clip into the pistol and shifted his attention to the enemy troops that were emerging from the trees. This group of grunts was closer now, much closer, and they opened fire. The Master Chief chose to target the most distant alien first, thereby ensuring that he would still get a crack at the others, even if they turned and tried to escape. The pistol shots came in quick succession. The grunts barked, hooted, and gurgled as the well-aimed bullets hurled their lifeless carcasses down the reverse slope. When there were no more targets to fire at, the Master Chief took a moment to reload the handgun, clicked on the safety, and returned the weapon to its holster. He jumped off the boulder and crouched under an outcropping of rock. He eyed the Banshee above. It was still there, circling well out of range, waiting to pounce should he emerge from cover. That meant he could sit there and wait for more ground forces to arrive, or he could abandon his hiding place and attempt to slip away. The Spartan had never been one for standing around, so he readied his assault rifle and slid forward over the rock. Once on open ground, it was a short dash past the scattering of dead grunts. He crouched beneath the cover offered by a copse of trees. He counted to 3, then dashed from boulder to boulder. He leapfrogged uphill, still very much aware of the Banshee at his back, but reasonably certain he'd been given the aircraft to slip. There were no blips on his threat detector until he topped the rise and paused to examine the terrain ahead. A telltale red dot popped onto his HUD. The Master Chief eased his way forward, waiting for the moment of contact. Then he saw movement as hunched bodies dashed from one scrap of cover to the next. There were 4 of them, including a blue-armoured elite. The elite charged recklessly forward, firing as he came. He'd engaged such elites before. There was some significance to the aliens' armour colours, and they always fought like aggressive rookies. A thin smile touched the Master Chief's lips. He ignored the aliens' badly placed shots, stood and returned fire. The elite's advance stalled, and the grunts began to fall back toward a stand of trees. His threat indicators sounded a warning, and a red arrow pointed to the right. The Master Chief drew and primed an M9 HE-DP grenade. He turned just in time to see another elite, this one in the scarlet armor of a veteran, charge him. The grenade was already in hand, and the distance to the target was sufficient, so the soldier let the M9 fly. The grenade detonated with a loud whump and tossed the enemy soldier into the air, while stripping a nearby tree of half its branches. The rookie was close now, and roared a battle cry. The alien hosed the Master Chief with plasma fire. His shields dropped precipitously. The Spartan backed away, fired his assault rifle in short control bursts, and finally managed to knock the remaining elite off his feet. With their leader down, the grunts broke ranks and began to scamper away. The Master Chief cut their retreat short in the hail of bullets. He eased up on the trigger, felt the silence settle in around him, and he knew he had made a mistake. The veteran had damned near blindsided him. How? He realized with a start that he was still fighting like part of a unit. Though he was trained to act independently, he had spent most of his military career as part of a team. The elite had managed to flank him because his was simply accustomed to one of his fellow Spartans watching out for him. He was cut off from the chain of command alone and most likely surrounded by the enemy. He nodded, his face grim behind the mirrored visor. The mission would require a major revision in his tactics. He pushed his way up through a meadow thick with knee-high spiky grass. He could hear the distant chatter of automatic weapons fire and knew some Marines were somewhere up ahead. He sprinted toward the sound of battle. Perhaps he wouldn't be on his own for long. Deployment +00 hours, 05 minutes, 08 seconds. Captain Key's mission clock. Lifeboat Kilo Tango Victor 17. An emergency descent to surface of Hilo. Maybe it was because the Autumn's navigator, Ensign Lovell, was at the controls, or maybe it was simply a matter of good luck. But whatever the reason, the rest of the trip down through Hilo's atmosphere was completely uneventful. So peaceful that it made Keyes nervous. "Where would you like me to put her down, sir?" Lovell inquired, as the lifeboat skimmed a grassy plain. "Anywhere," Keyes answered, "so long as there aren't any Covenant forces around. Some cover would be nice, since this boat will act like a magnet if we leave it out in the open. Like most of its kind, the lifeboat had never been intended for extended atmospheric use. It flew like a rock, in fact. But the suggestion made sense, so the pilot turned toward what he had arbitrarily designated as the west, and the point where the grasslands met a tumble of low rolling hills. The lifeboat was low, so low that the Covenant patrol barely had time to see what it was before the tiny vessel flashed over their heads and disappeared. The veteran elites, both of whom were mounted on small single-seat hover sleds, ghosts, stood to watch the lifeboat skim the plain. The senior of the pair called the sighting in. They turned toward the hills and opened their throttles. What had promised to be a long, boring day suddenly seemed a great deal more interesting. The elites glanced at each other, bent over their controls, and raced to see which of them could reach the lifeboat first, and which of them would score the first kill of the afternoon. Deep in the hills ahead, Lovell fired the lifeboat's bow thrusters, dropped what flaps the stubby little wings had, and jazzed the boat's belly jets. Keyes watched in admiration as the young pilot dropped the boat into a gully where it would be almost impossible to spot, except from directly overhead. Lavelle had been a troubled officer, well on his way to a dishonourable discharge when Keyes had recruited him. He'd come a long way since then. "Nice job," the captain said as the lifeboat settled onto its skids. "Okay, boys and girls, let's strip this ship of everything that might be useful and put as much distance between it and ourselves as we can. Corporal, post your marines as sentries. Wang, Dosky, Abiad, open those storage compartments. Let's see what brand of champagne the UNSC keeps in its lifeboats. Hikawa, give me a hand with this body." There was a certain amount of commotion as Nosali's corpse was carried outside and unceremoniously dumped into a crevice. The boat was stripped and the controls were disabled. With emergency packs on their backs, the bridge crew started up into the hills. They hadn't gone far when a sonic boom rolled over the land. The Pillar of Autumn roared across the sky and dropped over the horizon to the arbitrary south. Keyes held his breath as he waited to see what would happen. He, like all CEOs, had neural implants that linked him to the ship's AI, and key personnel. There was a pause, followed by what felt like a mild earth tremor. A moment later, a terse message from Cortana's subroutine scrolled across his vision, courtesy of his neural lists. CSR-1, burst broadcast. Pillar of Autumn is down. Those systems which remain functional are on standby. Operational readiness stands at 8.7%. CSR-1 out. It wasn't the sort of message that any commanding officer would want to receive. In spite of the fact that the Autumn would never swim through space again, Keyes took some small comfort from the fact that his ship still had the equivalent of a pulse and might still come in handy. He forced a smile. "Okay, people, what are we waiting for? Our cave awaits. The last one to the top digs the latrine." The bridge personnel continued their climb. In spite of efforts to keep the HEVs together, the Helljumpers came down in a landing zone that stretched approximately 3 kilometers in diameter. Some of the landings were classic two-point affairs in which the more fortunate Marines were able to jettison their crash cages about 50 meters off the ground and land like sim soldiers in a training vid. Others were a good deal less graceful, as the skeletal remains of their drop pods smashed against cliffs, dropped into lakes, and in one unfortunate case rolled into a deep ravine. As the surviving Helljumpers extricated themselves from their HEVs, a homing beacon snapped to life, and they were able to orient themselves to the red square which appeared on their transparent eye screens. That was where Major Silva had landed. A temporary HQ had been established, and the battalion would regroup. Each pod was stripped of extra weapons, ammo, and other supplies, which meant that the force which converged on the hot dry plateau was well equipped. Helljumpers were supposed to be able to operate without external resupply for 2-week periods, and Silva was pleased that his troops had retained most of their gear, despite the difficult drop conditions. In fact, Silva thought as he watched the troops stream in from every direction, "The only thing we lack is a fleet of warthogs and a squad of scorpions." But those assets would come. Oh, yes, they would. Shortly after the butt was wrenched from enemy hands. In the meantime, the Helljumpers would use what ground pounders always use, their feet. First Lieutenant Melissa McKay had landed safely, as had most of her 130-person company. 3 of her people had been killed in action and on the Autumn, and 2 were missing and presumed dead. Not too bad, all things considered. As luck would have it, McKay hit the dirt only half a click away from the homing beacon, which meant that by the time that a perimeter had been established, she had already humped her gear across the hardpan, located Major Silva, and reported in. McKay was one of his favourites. The ODST officer nodded by way of a greeting. "Nice of you to drop in, Lieutenant. I was beginning to wonder if you'd taken the afternoon off." "No, sir," McKay responded. "I dozed off on the way down and slept through my wake-up alarm. It won't happen again." Silva managed to keep a straight face. "Glad to hear it." He paused, then pointed. "You see that butt? The one with the structures on top? I want it." McKay looked, brought her binoculars up and looked again. The butt's range appeared along the bottom of the image and was soon chased out of the frame by coordinates that Wellesley inserted to replace the concepts of longitude and latitude, which worked on most planetary surfaces, but not here. The sun was setting, but there was still enough light to see by. As she surveyed this target area, a Covenant Banshee took off from the top of the butte, circled out toward the west, and came straight at her. The only thing that was surprising about that was the fact that it had taken the enemy so long to respond to their landing. "It looks like a tough nut to crack, sir, especially from the ground." "It is," Silver agreed, "which is why we're going to tackle it from both the air and the ground. Lord only knows how they did it, but a group of Pelican pilots were able to launch their transports before the old man brought the Autumn down, and they're hidden about 10 clicks north of here. We can use them to support an airborne operation." McKay lowered her binoculars. "And the Autumn?" "She's KIA back that-a-way," Silver replied, hooking his thumb back over his shoulder. "I'd like to go pay my final respects, but that will have to wait. What we need is a base, something we can fortify and use to hold the Covenant at bay. Otherwise, they're going to hunt our people down 1, 2, or 3 at a time, which is where the butt comes in," McKay said. "Exactly," Silva answered. "So, start walking. I want your company at the foot of that butt, ASAP. If there's a path to the top, I want you to find it and follow it. Once you get their attention, we'll hit them from above." There was a loud bang as one of the first company's rocket jockeys fired her M19 SSM man-portable launcher, blew the incoming Banshee out of the sky, and put a period to Silva's sentence. The battalion cheered as the Banshee bits dribbled smoke and wobbled out of the sky. "Sir, yes, sir," McKay answered. "When we get up there, you can buy me a beer." "Fair enough," Silva agreed, "but we'll have to brew it first." Even grunts had to be granted some rest once in a while, which was why long cylindrical tanks equipped with airlocks had been shipped to Halo's surface, where they were pumped full of methane and used in lieu of barracks. Having survived nearly the suicidal attack on the Autumn by rescuing a wounded elite and insisting that the warrior be evacuated rather than left to die, Yap had extended the duration of his own life, not to mention those of the grunts directly under his command. Now, by way of celebrating that victory, the alien soldier was curled in a tiny ball, fast asleep. One leg twitched slightly as the grunt dreamed of making his way through the swamps of his homeworld, past naturally occurring pillars of fire, to the marshy estuary where he had grown up. Then, before he could cross a row of ancient stepping stones to the reedy hut on the far side of the family's ancestral fish pond, Gaga shook his arm. Yap, get up quickly. Remember the elite we brought down from the ship? He's outside and he wants to see you." Yap sprang to his feet. "Me? Did he say why?" No," the other grunt replied, "but it can't be good." That much was certainly true. Yap reflected as he waded through the chaos of equipment that hung in untidy clusters along the length of the cylinder. He entered the communal lavatory and hurried to don his armor, breathing apparatus and weapons harness. Which was more dangerous, he wondered, to show up disheveled and have the elite find fault with his appearance, or to show up later because he had taken the time required to ensure that his appearance would be acceptable. Dealing with elites was always seemed to involve such conundrums, which was one of the many reasons that Yap had a hearty dislike for their kind. Finally, having decided to favour speed over appearance, Yap entered the airlock, waited for it to cycle him through, and emerged into the bright sunlight. The first thing he noticed was that the sentries, who could normally be found leaning against the tank discussing how awful the rations were, stood at rigid attention. "Are you the one called Yap?" The deep voice came from behind him and caused the grunt to jump. He turned, came to attention, and tried to look soldierly. "Yes, Excellency." The elite named Zuka Zamami wore no helmet. He couldn't, not with the dressing that had wrapped around his head, but the rest of his armor was still in place. It was spotlessly clean, as were the weapons he wore. "Good. The medics told me that you and your file not only pulled me off the ship, but forced the assault boat to bring me down to the surface." Yap felt a lump form in his throat and struggled to swallow it. The pilot had been somewhat reluctant, citing orders to wait for a full load of troops before breaking contact with human ship, but Gaga had been quite insistent, even going so far as to pull his plasma pistol and wave it about. "Yes, Excellency," Yap replied, "but I can explain." "There's no need," Zamami replied. Yap almost jumped. The elite's voice lacked the customary bark of command. It sounded almost reassuring. Yap was anything but reassured. "You saw that his superior had been wounded," the elite continued, "and did what you could to ensure that he received timely medical treatment. That sort of initiative is rare, especially among the lower classes." Yap stared at the elite, unable to reply. He felt disoriented. In his universe, elites didn't offer accolades. "To show my appreciation, I've had you transferred." Yap liked the normally sleepy unit to which he was attached and had no desire to leave it. "Transferred, Excellency? To what unit?" "Why, to my unit," the elite replied, as if nothing could be more natural. "My assistant was killed as we boarded the human ship. You will take his place." Yap felt his spirits plummet. The elites who acted as special operatives of the prophets were fanatics, chosen for their limitless willingness to risk their lives and the lives of those under their command. "Thank you, Excellency," Yap stuttered, "but I don't deserve such an honor." "Nonsense," the elite replied. "Your name has already been added to the rolls. Gather your belongings, say goodbye to your cohort, and meet me here 15 units from now. I'm scheduled to appear in front of the Council of Masters later this evening. You will accompany me." "Yes, Excellency," Yap said obediently. "May I inquire as to the purpose of the meeting?" "You may," Zamami replied, allowing a hand to touch the bandage that circled his head. "The human who inflicted this wound was a warrior so capable that he represents a danger to the entire battle group, an individual who, if our records can be believed, is personally responsible for the deaths of more than 1,000 of our soldiers." Yap felt his knees start to give. "By himself, Excellency?" Yes, but never fear, those days are over. Once I receive authorization, you and I will find this human." "Find him?" Yap exclaimed, protocol forgotten. "Then what?" "Then," Zamami growled, "we will kill him." The dawn air was cold, and Mackay could see her breath as she stared upward and wondered what awaited her. Half the night had been spent marching across the stretch of intervening hardpan to get into position below the butte, and the other half had been spent between trying to find a way up to the top and grabbing a little bit of sleep. The second task had been easy, perhaps a little too easy, because other than a sloppily constructed barricade, the foot of the 4-foot wide ramp was entirely unguarded. Still, the last thing the Covenant expected was for a human ship to appear out of slipspace and land infantry on the surface of the construct. Viewed in that light, a certain lack of preparation was understandable. In any case, the path started at ground level, spiraled steadily upward, and hadn't been used in some time judging from what she could see. That's the way it appeared anyway, although it was hard to be sure from below, and Silva was understandably reluctant to send in one of the Pelicans lest it give the plan away. No, Mackay and her troops would have to find their way up along the narrow path, engage whatever defences the Covenant might have in place, and hope that the Pelicans arrived quickly enough to take the pressure off. The lieutenant eyed the readout on the transparent, boom-mounted ice screen attached to her helmet, waited for the countdown to complete itself, and started up the steep incline. Company Sergeant Tink Carter turned to face the men and women lined up behind him. "What the hell are you waiting for? An engraved invitation? Let's get in gear." While B Company marched toward the butt, the C Company marched off to rendezvous with the Pelicans. The rest of the battalion used the remaining hours of darkness to prepare for the following day under Major Silva's watchful eye. Wireless sensors were placed 200 metres out and monitored by Wellesley. 3-person fire teams took up positions 150 metres out, and a rapid response team was established to support them. There wasn't any natural cover here, so the hell jumpers moved their gear up onto a low rise and did what they could to place fortifications around it. Dirt excavated from the firing pits was used to build a low barrier around the battalion's perimeter. Connecting trenches were dug, and a landing pad was established so that Pelicans could put down within the battalion's footprint. Now, standing at the very highest point of the pad and gazing off to the west, Silva listened as Wellesley spoke into his ear. "I have good news and bad news. The good news is that Lieutenant Mackay has started her climb. The bad news is that the Covenant is about to attack from the west." Silva lowered his glasses, turned and looked to the west. An enormous dust cloud had appeared during the 5 minutes that had passed since he looked that way. "What kind of attack?" the ODST officer demanded curtly. "That's rather difficult to say," Wellesley replied deliberately, "especially without the ships, satellites and recon drones that I normally rely on for information. However, judging from the amount of dust, plus my knowledge of the Covenant weapons inventory, it looks like an old-fashioned cavalry charge similar to the one that Napoleon threw my way at Waterloo." "You weren't at Waterloo," Silva reminded the AI as he brought the binoculars up to his eyes. "But assuming you're correct, what are they writing?" "Rapid attack and reconnaissance vehicles, which our forces refer to as ghosts," Wellesley replied pedantically. "Perhaps 100 of them, judging from the dust." Silva swore. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Covenant had to respond to his presence. He knew that, but he had hoped for a little more time. Now, with fully half his strength committed elsewhere, he was left with roughly 200 troops. Still, they were ODST troops, the best in the UNSC. "All right," Silva said grimly. "If they want to charge, let's give them the traditional counter. Order the pickets to pull back. Tell companies A and D to form an infantry square, and let's get all the backup ammo below ground level. I want assault weapons in the pits, launchers halfway up the slope, and snipers up on the pad. No one fires until I give the command." Like Silva, Wellesley knew that the Roman legions had used the infantry square to good effect, as had Lord Wellington and many since. The formation, which consisted of a box with ranks of troops all facing outward, was extremely hard to break. The AI relayed the instructions to the troops, who, though surprised to be deployed in such an archaic way, knew exactly what to do. By the time the ghosts arrived and washed around the rise like an incoming tide, the square was set. Silva studied the rangefinder in his tac display and waited until the enemy was in range. He keyed the all-hands frequency and gave the order. "Fire! Fire!" Sheets of armor-piercing bullets sleeted through the air. The lead machines staggered as if they had run into a wall. Elites tumbled out of their seats, and a runaway machine skittered to the east. But there were a lot of the attack vehicles, and As the oncoming horde spread the Marines with plasma fire, ODST troopers began to fall. Fortunately, the weapons that fired the energy bolts were fixed, which meant that the rise would continue to offer the humans a good deal of protection, so long as the ghosts weren't allowed to climb the slopes. Also operating in the Hell Jumpers' favour were the skittish nature of the machines themselves, some poor driving, and a lack of overall coordination. Many of the elites seemed eager to score a kill. They broke formation and raced ahead of their comrades. Silva saw one attack craft take fire from another ghost, which crashed into a third machine, which subsequently burst into flame. The majority of the elites were quite competent, however, and after some initial confusion, they went to work devising tactics intended to break the square. A gold-armored elite led the effort. First, rather than allowing the riders to circle the humans in whatever direction they chose, he forced them into a counterclockwise rotation. Then, having reduced collisions by at least a third, the enemy officer chose the lowest pit. The one against which fired the fixed plasma cannons would be most effective, and drove at it time and time again. Marines were killed, the outgoing fire slackened, and one corner of the square became vulnerable. Silva countered by sending a squad to reinforce the weak point, ordering his snipers to concentrate their fire on the gold elite, and calling on the rocket jockeys to provide rotating fire. If the humans' launchers had a weakness, it was the fact that they could only fire 2 rockets before being reloaded, which left at least 5 seconds between volleys. By alternating fire and concentrating on the ghosts closest to the hill, the Marine defenders were able to leverage the weapon's effectiveness. This strategy proved effective. Wrecked, burned, and mangled ghosts formed a metal barricade, further protecting the humans from plasma fire and intervening with new attacks. Silva lifted his binoculars and surveyed the smoke-laced battle area. He offered a silent thanks to whatever deity watched over the infantry. Had he led the assault, Silva would have sent in air support first to pin the Hell Jumpers down, followed by ghosts from the west. His opposite number had been trained differently, had too much confidence in his mechanized troops, or was just plain inexperienced. Whatever the reason, the Banshees were thrown into the mix late. Apparently, as an afterthought, Silva's rocket jockeys knocked 2 of the aircraft out of the air on the first pass, nailed another one on the second pass, and sent the 4th running south with smoke trailing from its failing engines. Finally, with the Gold Elite dead and more than half of their numbers slaughtered, the remaining elites withdrew. Some of the ghosts remained untouched, but at least a dozen of the surviving ships carried extra riders, and most were riddled with bullet holes. 2, their engines destroyed, were towed off the battlefield. This is why we need the butt, Silva thought as he surveyed the carnage, to avoid another victory like this one. 23 Hell Jumpers were dead, 6 were critically injured, and 10 had lesser wounds. Static burped in his ear, and McKay's voice crackled across the command frequency. Blue 1 to Red 1, over. Silva swung toward the butt, raised his glasses, and saw smoke drift away from a point about halfway up the pillar-like formation. This is Red 1. Go. Over. I think we have their attention, sir. The Major grinned. It looked more like a grimace. Roger that, Blue 1. We put on a show for them as well. Hang tight. Help is on the way. McKay ducked back beneath a rocky overhang as the latest batch of plasma grenades rained down from above. Some kept on falling. Others found targets, bonded to them, and exploded seconds later. A trooper screamed as one of the alien bombs landed on top of his rucksack. A sergeant yelled, dump the pack, but the Marine panicked and backpedaled off the path. The grenade exploded and sprayed the cliff face with what looked like red paint. The infantry officer winced. Roger, Red 1, Sooner would be a whole hell of a lot better than later, over and out. Weatherly ordered the pelicans into the air as Silver stirred out over the plain. He wondered if his plan would work and if he could stomach the price. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 2. I think I need a drink. Take a wee break now and then do chapter 3. So there's only 12 chapters. There's not including the prologue chapter. Okay, so I'm going to go into the kitchen and make a cup of coffee. Bring it back here. And maybe I'll make some toast or something as well. And then then once I've had a few minutes, I'll continue chapter 3, or start chapter 3 even. Okay, be right back. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so yeah, I've got some coffee. Do Egberts. And some toast. Okay, good. So hopefully, if there's no issues, I can complete chapter 3 and chapter 4. Yeah, so that Brennan's bread is really nice. Okay. Chapter 3. D plus 03 14 26. Spartan 117 mission clock. Surface. Up ahead, the Master Chief saw a light so bright that it seemed to compete with the sun. It originated somewhere beyond the rocks and trees ahead, surged up between the horns of a large U-shaped construct, and raced into the sky, where the planet Threshold served as a pastel backdrop. Was the pulse some sort of beacon, part of what held the ring world together? There was no way for him to know. Cortana had already warned the Spartan that a group of Marines had crash-landed in the area, so he wasn't surprised to hear the rattle of automatic weapons fire or the characteristic whine as Covenant energy weapons answered in kind. He eased his way through the scrub and onto the hillside above the U-shaped edifice and the blocky structures that surrounded it. He could see a group of grunts, jackals, and elites dashing back and forth as they tried to overwhelm a group of Marines. Rather than charge in, assault weapon blazing, the Master Chief chose to use his M60 pistol instead. He raised the weapon, activated the 2x magnification, and took careful aim. A series of well-placed shots knocked a trio of grunts off their feet. Before the Covenant forces could locate where the incoming fire had originated, the Master Chief opened fire on a blue-armoured elite. It took a full magazine to put the warrior down, but it beat the hell out of going toe-to-toe with the alien when there wasn't any need to. The quick, unexpected sniping attack gave the Marines the opportunity they needed. There was a quick flurry of fire as the Spartan made his way down the slope, paused to strip some plasma grenades off a dead grunt, and was welcomed by a friendly private. "Good to see you, Chief. Welcome to the party." The Spartan's reply was a curt nod. "Where's your CO, Private?" "Back there," the Marine said. He turned and called over his shoulder, "Hey, Sarge." The Master Chief recognized the tough-looking sergeant who trotted to join him. He had last seen Sergeant Johnson during a search and destroy run aboard one of Reach's orbital docking facilities. "What's your status here, Sergeant?" "It's a mess," Johnson growled. "We're scattered all over this valley." He paused and added in a quiet voice, "We called for evac, but until you showed up, I thought we were done for." "Don't worry," Cortana said over the Spartan's external speakers. "We'll stay here till evac arrives. I've been in touch with AI Wellesley. The Helljumpers are in the process of taking over some Covenant real estate, and one of the Pelicans has been dispatched to pick you up." "Glad to hear it," Johnson replied. "Some of my people need medical attention." "Here comes another Covenant dropship," the private put in. "It's time to roll out the welcome mat." "Okay, Passanti," Johnson barked. "Reform the squad. Let's get to work." The Master Chief looked up and saw that the Marine was correct. Another Covenant landing craft hovered for a moment, then dropped close to the ground. The oddly shaped vehicle dipped slightly, and the mandible structures that formed the bulk of the dropship's fuselage hinged open. A clutch of grunts and an elite dropped to the ground. The Master Chief moved 50 meters to the right and raised his pistol once again. In seconds, a team of Marines poured fire into the Covenant LZ and flushed them out. As the aliens scattered and dove for cover, the Spartan put them down one by one. There was a brief respite, but the Master Chief paused to survey the situation. Cortana pulled up their marine positions, tagged them as Fire Team C, and highlighted their locations on his HUD. Several of them had climbed the large structure and dominated the area, and the rest patrolled the perimeter. He had just readied his assault rifle when a marine voice called out, "Contact! Enemy dropship sighted. They are trying to flank us." Seconds later, the Spartan's motion sensor painted a contact, a large one, nearby. He stayed close to a large boulder and used it for cover, then cautiously checked for targets. The dropship disgorged another contingent of troops, including a trio of jackals. Their distinctive, glowing shields flared as Sergeant Johnson's men opened fire. Bullets ricocheted as the bird-like aliens crouched behind their protective devices, like medieval footmen forming a shield wall. Behind them, more grunts, and the blue elite spread out in an enveloping formation. It was a good tactic, particularly if there were more dropships inbound. Eventually, the Covenant would wear down the marine defences and overrun the position. There was just one problem with their plan. He was in a perfect flanking position. He crouched, then sprinted forward into the jackal's line. His assault rifle barked and bullets tore into the exposed aliens. They had barely hit the ground as the Spartan spun, primed a captured plasma grenade, and threw it at the elite, almost 30 meters away. The alien only had time to roar in surprise before the glowing plasma orb struck him in the center of his helmet. The weapon fused to the alien's helmet and began to pulse a sickly blue-white. A moment later, as the alien attempted to tear off his helmet, the grenade detonated. After that, it was a relatively simple matter for the Master Chief to move through the ruins and hunt down the remainder of the Covenant reaction force. A welcome voice sounded from his radio receiver. "This is Echo 419. Does anyone read me? Repeat, any UNSC personnel respond." Cortana was quick to reply on the same frequency. "Roger, Echo 419. We read you. This is Fireteam Charlie. Is that you, Fohammer?" "Roger, Fireteam Charlie," Fohammer drawled. "It's good to hear from you." There was a distant rumbling, and the Master Chief turned to identify the source of the noise. In the distance, he saw movement. Lifeboats trailing smoke and fire as their friction-heated hulls tore through the atmosphere. "They're coming in fast," Cortana warned. "If they make it down, the Covenant will be right on top of them." The Chief nodded. "Then we should find them first. Fohammer, we need you to disengage your Warthog. The Master Chief and I are going to see if we can save some soldiers." "Roger." The Pelican rounded the spire of the alien structure, circled the area once, then hovered above the crest of a nearby hill. Slung beneath the Pelican was a four-wheel vehicle, an M12 LRV Warthog. The light reconnaissance vehicle hung beneath the dropship for a moment, then dropped to the ground as Fohammer released it from her craft. The Warthog bounced once on its heavy suspension, slid 5 meters down the hill, then was still. "Okay, Fireteam Charlie, one Warthog deployed," Fohammer said. "Saddle up and give him hell." "Roger, Fohammer. Stand by to load survivors and evac them to safety." "That's affirmative." Fohammer out. As the Marines sprinted for the Pelican, the Master Chief made his way to the Warthog. The all-terrain vehicle was mounted with a standard M41 light anti-aircraft gun, or LAAG. The weapon fired 500 rounds of 12.7 x 99mm armor-piercing rounds per minute and was effective on both ground and airborne targets. The vehicle was capable of carrying up to 3 soldiers, and one Marine had already taken his place behind the gun. His rank and ID scrolled across the Spartan's display. PFC Fitzgerald M. "Hey Chief," Fitzgerald said. "Sergeant Johnson said you could use a gunner." The Spartan nodded. "That's right, Private. There's 2 boatloads of Marines on the far side of that ridge, and we're going after them. Fitzgerald pulled the gun's charging lever back toward his chest and released it with a metallic snap. A shell slipped into the first of the weapon's 3 barrels. "I'm your man, Chief. Let's roll." The Master Chief pulled himself up behind the wheel, started the engine, and strapped himself into the seat. The engine roared, and the wheels kicked up geysers of dirt. The Warthog accelerated to the top of a rise, caught some air, and landed with a spine-jarring thump. "I put a nav indicator on your HUD," Cortana said. "Just follow the arrow." "Figures," the Spartan said, a hint of amusement in his level voice. "You always were a backseat driver." True to their aircraft's nickname, Keyes heard the Banshee long before he actually caught a glimpse of the attack aircraft. The alien pilot had them on the sensors. Keyes was sure of that, and it wouldn't be long before another team dropped out of the sky in an attempt to root them out. The hills, which had seemed so welcoming when the command party first landed, had been transformed into a hellish landscape where the humans scuttled from one rocky crevice to the next, always on the run, and never allowed to rest. They had faced capture on 3 different occasions, but each time Corporal Wilkins and his Marines had managed to blow a hole in the Covenant's tightening net and lead the naval personnel to safety. But for how much longer, Keyes wondered. The continuous scrambling through the rocks, the lack of sleep, and the constant danger not only left them exhausted, but levied a toll on morale as well. Abiad, Lovell, and Hikawa were still in fairly good shape, as were Wang, Singh, but Ensign Dovsky had started to crack. It had started with a little self-concerned whining, grown into a stream of non-stop complaints, and now threatened to escalate into something worse. The humans were gathered in a dry grotto. Jagged rocks projected over their heads to provide some protection from the Banshee above. Wang knelt next to the thin, dirt-choked stream that gushed from the rocky passageway. He splashed water on his face. Singh was busy filling the command party's canteens, while Dovsky sat on a rock and glowered. "They know where we are," the junior officer said accusingly, as if her commanding officer were somehow at fault. Keyes sighed. "They know where we are, sir." "Okay," the ensign replied. "They know where we are, sir, so why continue to run? They'll catch us in the end." "Maybe," Keyes agreed as he dabbed ointment onto a burst blister. "And maybe not. I've been in contact with both Cortana and Wellesley. They're both busy at the moment, but they'll send help as soon as they can. In the meantime, we tie up as many of their resources as possible, avoid capture, and kill some of the bastards if we can." "For what?" Dovsky demanded. "So you can make Admiral. I submit that we've done all we could reasonably be expected to do. That the longer we delay, the harsher the Covenant will be. It makes sense to surrender now." "And you are an idiot," Lieutenant Hikawa put in, her eyes blazing with uncharacteristic anger. "First of all, the captain rates the honorific Sir. You will render that honorific, or I will plant my foot in your ass. Secondly, use your brain, assuming that you have one. The Covenant doesn't take prisoners. Everyone knows that, so surrender equals death." "Oh yeah," Dovsky said defiantly. "Well, why haven't they already killed us then? They could strafe us with cannons, fire rockets into the rocks, or drop bombs on our position. But they haven't. Explain that." "Explain this," Singh said, inserting the barrel of his M6D into the ensign's left ear. "I'm starting to think that you look a lot like a grunt. Lavelle, check her face. I'll bet it peels right off." Keyes closed the fastener on the light-duty deck shoes, wished he had a pair of combat boots like the Marines wore, and knew Dovsky was partially correct. Insubordination aside, it did seem as though the aliens were intent on capturing his party rather than killing them. But why? It didn't square with their behaviour in the past. Of course, the Covenant had changed tactics on him before, when he had beaten the tar out of them at Sigma Octanus, and again when they'd returned the favour at Reach. The officer watched the tableau as it unfolded in front of him. Hikawa stood with her fists on her hips, face contorted with anger, while Singh screwed his weapon into Dosky's ear. The rest of the bridge crew were frozen, uncertain. The Marines weren't present, thank God, but it would be naive to think they weren't aware of the ensign's opinions or of the discord among their superiors. The enlisted ranks always knew, one way or another, so what to do. Dosky wasn't about to change her mind, that was obvious, and she was becoming a liability. The Banshee whined loudly as it passed over the grotto for the second time. They needed to move, and do it soon. Okay, Key said, you win. I should charge you with cowardice, insubordination, and dereliction of duty, but I'm a little pressed for time, so I hereby give you permission to surrender. Hikawa, relieve her of her weapon, ammo, and pack. Singh, truss her up. Nothing too tight, just enough so she can't follow us. A look of horror came over Dosky's face. You're going to leave me? All by myself, with no supplies? No, Keyes answered calmly. You wanted to surrender, remember? The Covenant will keep you company, and as for supplies, well, I have no idea what sort of rations they eat, but it should be interesting if they allow you a last meal. Bon appetit. Dosky started to babble incoherently, but Singh grew tired of it, shoved a bottle dressing into the ensign's mouth, and used some all-purpose repair tape to hold it in place. He used some of the same tape to hog-tie the officer. That should keep her out of trouble for a while. Rocks clattered as Corporal Wilkins and two of his fellow Marines made their way down the stream bed. The non-com saw Dosky, nodded as if everything were perfectly normal, and looked at Keyes. A Covenant dropship landed a squad of elites about 1 click to the south, sir. It's time to move. The naval officer nodded. Thank you, Corporal. The command team is ready. Please lead the way. Meanwhile, a few hundred meters above and half a click to the north, the elite named Ado Martimi put his Banshee into a wide turn and watched the dropship touch down. There weren't many places to land, which meant that once on the ground, his fellow elites would still have a ways to go. Rather than drop hundreds of troops onto the rocky hillsides and leave them to scramble over the exhausting up and down terrain, the Covenant command structure decided to use its air superiority to locate the humans and capture them. And there, Mortimi mused, is the problem. Locating the aliens is one thing, capturing them is another. During the time since they had landed, the humans had proven themselves to be quite resourceful. Not only had they evaded capture, they had killed 6 of their pursuers, who, acting under strict orders to take the aliens alive, were at a considerable disadvantage. It made more sense simply to kill the humans. Of course, he was a mere pilot and soldier, not privy to the machinations of the prophets or the shipmasters. After the human lifeboat had been located, it wasn't long before the Covenant scouts found Isna Nosili's body and ran a check on his identity. Intelligence was notified, official wheels began to turn, and the Covenant commanders were confronted with a problem. Why would an Asuna risk his life to board a human lifeboat and ride it to the surface? The answer seemed obvious, because someone important was on that boat. All of which served to explain why none of the humans had been killed. There was no way to know which alien Nosili had been after, so all of them had to be preserved. Mortimer glanced down at the instruments arrayed in front of him. A string of 7 heat blobs was winding its way to the arbitrary north, while one remained behind. What did that signify? It wasn't long before Mortimer's Banshee circled above the grotto. Dovsky wrestled to free herself from the tape, and the Covenant closed in around her. Smoke swirled around the top of the butt as a Pelican pilot made use of his 70mm chin gun to silence a Covenant gun emplacement. Satisfied with the Covenant plasma turret, a powerful weapon that could be easily deployed and recovered, was silent. He dropped down to within 4 feet of the top of the butt. 15 ODST hell jumpers, 3 more than the Pelican's operational maximum, leapt from the Pelican's troop bay and fanned out. Cramming extra troops into a Pelican was a risky move. But Silva wanted to put as many soldiers as possible on the Mesa, and Lieutenant Cookie Peterson knew his ship. The Pelican was still in reasonably good shape. He had the best maintenance crew in the Navy. What more could a pilot ask for? Peterson felt the dropship drift upward as the Marines bailed out, and he fought to keep the ship steady and level. He spotted movement in the landing zone. The chin gun, linked to his helmet sensors, followed the movement of Peterson's head. He spotted a column of Covenant troopers and fired. The heavy rotary cannon uttered a throaty roar and pounded the enemy formation into a puddle of blue-green paste. As the last of the hell jumpers jumped off, the crew chief yelled "clear" over their intercom. Peterson fired the ship's belly jets, demanded additional power from the twin turbine engines, and left the butt behind. "This is Echo 136, the pilot said into his mic. "We are green, clean and extremely mean. Over." "Roger that," Wellesley replied emotionlessly. "Please return to waypoint 25 for another load of troopers. And if you're going to insist on poetry, try some Kipling. You might find some of it rather instructive. Over and out." Peterson grinned, directed at a one-fingered salute in the general direction of Battalion HQ, and banked the dropship into a wide turn. It's a lot of reading to do. Throat's getting sore. Okay, so resistance had slackened within minutes of the first landing, which allowed Lieutenant Melissa McKay and the surviving members of her company to advance upward. A significant number of the path's defenders were pulled away in a last-ditch attempt to hold their position. McKay discovered that the path was blocked by an ancient rockfall about 30 metres up, but saw the side door that was located just downhill of it, and knew what the aliens had been trying to defend. Here was the back door, the way she could enter the butt's interior and push upward from there. Plasma fire stuttered out of the entryway, struck the cliff above her head, and blew rocky divots out of the smooth surface. McKay motioned for her troops to retreat back around the pillar's broad curvature and waved a hand in the air. "Hey, Top, I need a launcher." The company sergeant was 6 troopers back, so that a single well-placed grenade couldn't kill both leaders at once. He signalled assent, bawled an order, and passed one of the M19s forward. McKay accepted the weapon from the private behind her, checked to ensure that it packed a full load of rockets, and inched around the curve. Plasma fire sizzled out of the door, but the officer forced herself to remain perfectly still. She triggered the weapon's 2x scope, sighted carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The tube jumped as the 102mm rocket raced away, sailed through the hole, and detonated with a loud roar. There must have been some ammo stored inside, because there was a blue-white secondary explosion which shook the rock beneath the ODST officer's boots. A gout of fire flared from the side of the cliff. It was difficult to imagine anyone or anything having survived such a blast, so McKay passed the launcher to the rear and waved her troops forward. There was a cheer as the Marines ran up the path, shouldered their way through the smoke, and entered the butt's ancient interior. There were bodies, or what had been bodies. Fortunately, the tunnel was intact. A couple of troopers collected plasma weapons, tried them out on the nearest wall, and added them to their personal armament. Others, McKay included, started up through a 30-metre wide well toward the circle of daylight above. She saw a shadow pass overhead as one of the pelicans dropped even more hell jumpers into the mesa. The distant thump of a frag grenade detonation made dust and loose soil tumble down on them. "Hey, Loot," Private Satha said. "What's the deal with this?" Satha stamped on the floor and it rang in response. That was when McKay realised that she and her troops were standing on a large metal grating. "What's it for?" the private wondered aloud. To keep us out?" McKay shook her head. "No, it looks old. Too old to have been put in place by the Covenant." "I found a lift," one of the Marines yelled. "That's what it looks like anyway. Come check it out." McKay went to investigate. This was a way to reach the mesa. Her boot dislodged a shell casing which fell through one of the grating's rectangular holes and dropped into the darkness below. It was a long time before it could be heard clanging off ancient stone. My goodness. That's quite a big chapter. Okay. Silva, Wellesley, and the rest of the Major's headquarters organisation were on top of the butt, waiting for her by the time McKay rode the anti-grav lift to the surface and stepped out into the harsh sunlight. She blinked as she looked around. Bodies lay everywhere. Some wore marine green, but the vast majority were dressed in the rainbow colours that the Covenant used to identify its various ranks and specialties. A squad of hell jumpers moved through the carnage, searching for wounded humans and kicking corpses to make sure that the enemy soldiers were actually dead. One of them attempted to rise and received a burst from an assault weapon for his trouble. "Welcome to Alpha Base," Major Silva said as he arrived at McKay's side. "You and your company did a damn good job, Lieutenant. Wellesley will have the rest of the battalion up here within the hour. It looks like I owe you that beer." "Yes, sir," McKay replied happily. "You sure as hell do." The tunnel was huge, plenty large enough to handle a scorpion tank, which meant that the Master Chief had little difficulty steering the Warthog through the initial opening. He'd almost missed the entry at the bottom of a large dry wash. Cortana's sensors had identified the entrance to the tunnel system. It's not a natural formation, she warned him. That meant someone built it. Logically, it meant that the tunnel led somewhere, and it might shave precious time off his search for the crashed lifeboats. Once inside, things became a little more difficult as the Spartan was forced to maneuver the LRV up ramps through a series of tight turns and right to the very edge of a pit. A quick recon confirmed that the gap was narrow enough to jump, assuming the hog had a running start. The Master Chief backed away, warned the gunner to hang on, and put his foot to the floor. The LRV raced up the ramp, sailed through the air, and jounced to a hard landing on the other side. "I'm picking up lots of Covenant traffic," Cortana said. "It sounds like Major Silva and the Helljumpers have captured an enemy position. If we can round up the rest of the survivors and find Captain Keyes, we'll have a chance to coordinate some serious resistance." "Good," the Master Chief answered. "It's time something broke our way." The Warthog's headlights swung across ancient walls as the Spartan turned the wheel, and the LRV emerged into a large open area dotted with mysterious installations. It was dark. The road ended in front of a deep chasm. It wasn't long before Covenant troops emerged like maggots spilling out of a rotting corpse. Plasma fires splashed across the Warthog's windscreen. The Spartan dove from the vehicle, crouched near the driver's side front tire, and drew his pistol. Fitzgerald opened up with the LAAG and swept the area with fire. Spent shell casings rained all around them. The chief peered over the edge of the Warthog. They were dangerously exposed. The roadway they'd been using was devoid of cover, elevated roughly 3 meters above the rest of the massive vaulted chamber. Worse, it bisected the chamber, which left them exposed on virtually all sides. The giant enclosure was dimly lit. Visibility was poor, and the muzzle flash from the Warthog's gun played hell with his night vision. He blinked his eyes to clear them, then activated his pistol scope. The metal floor dropped away to either side, and every surface was engraved with the strange geometric patterns that festooned Halo's mysterious architecture. Set well back from their position were a number of small structures, pillars, and support pylons. The Covenant were dug in among them. A grunt popped out from cover, his plasma pistol glowing green. He had overcharged the weapon. The little SOBs liked to dump energy into the weapon and discharge it all at once. It drained the weapon damn quick, but it also inflicted hellish damage on the target. A pulsing green-white orb of plasma sizzled past the Warthog. The Master Chief returned fire, then dropped back behind the hog. "Fitzgerald," he barked, "keep firing them. I'll move up on the left and take them out." "Got it." The tri-barreled gun thundered and fire-hosed the Covenant position. The Spartan was prepared to charge ahead and into the fight when his motion sensor painted movement from the rear. The LAAG ceased fire as Fitzgerald yelled in pain and fell from the back of the Warthog. The Marine's helmet cracked into the metal floor. A shard of glossy, translucent material, tapered to a wicked point, protruded from the Marine's bicep. The shard glowed a ghostly purple. "God damn it," Fitzgerald grunted as he tried to regain his footing. 2 seconds later, the purple shard exploded and blood spread from the wound. Fitzgerald howled in agony. There was no time to tend to Fitzgerald's injuries. A pair of grunts charged up the slight incline and opened fire. Bars of the glossy projectiles arced toward them and ricocheted madly from the Warthog. They were too close. The chief fired at the nearest grunt. 3 shots in succession. A trio of bullet pocks formed a neat cluster in the alien's chest. The grunt's partner squealed in anger and brought the gun to bear, an odd hunchbacked device with the ridge of the glossy projectiles protruding from it like dorsal fins. The weapons spat purple-white needles at him. He sidestepped and slammed the butt of the pistol into the grunt's head. The alien's skull caved in. He kicked the corpse back down the incline. Fitzgerald had crawled to cover behind the warthog. He was pale but didn't look shocky yet. The Spartan grabbed a first aid kit and expertly treated the wound. Self-sealing biofoam filled the wound, packed it off and numbed it. The young Marine would need some stitches and some time to rebuild the torn, savaged muscle of his arm, but he'd live if either of them made it out of here alive. "You okay?" he asked the wounded soldier. Fitzgerald nodded, wiped sweat from his forehead with a bloody hand, then struggled back to his feet. Without another word, he manned the LAAG. It took the better part of 15 minutes for the Master Chief and the gunner to sweep the area clear of Covenant forces. The Spartan patrolled the perimeter. To the left of the warthog, the chamber stretched roughly 80 meters, then ended, as did the road ahead, in a massive chasm. "Any ideas?" he asked Cortana. There was a brief pause as the AI examined the data. The roadway ahead ends in a cap, but it's logical to assume that there's some kind of bridge mechanism. Find the controls that extend the bridge and we should be able to get across. He nodded. He turned back and crossed the roadway and headed off to the right of the parked warthog. As he passed the vehicle, he called over his shoulder to Fitzgerald. "Wait here, I'm going to find us a way across." The Master Chief marched across the chamber and checked the odd structures that dotted the landscape. Some were illuminated by the dim glow from some kind of light panels, but there was no indication what powered them or what the structures contained. He frowned. There didn't seem to be any sign of mechanisms or controls. He was about to head back to the warthog and backtrack their course, then stopped. He stared at one of the massive pillars that stretched to the ceiling far overhead. There was nothing down here, but perhaps the mechanism he sought was above them. He moved as far to the end of the area as he could. Unlike the opposite side of the chamber, this half was bordered by a high, grooved metal wall. He followed the edge of the barrier and was gratified to locate a gap in the wall, a doorway. Inside, a ramp led up 20 meters, then turned 90 degrees to the left. The Spartan drew his pistol, activated his helmet lamp, and crept up the ramp. His caution was justified. As he reached the top, his motion sensor showed a contact right on top of him. He ducked around the corner just in time to meet the charge of a crimson armoured elite. The elite growled a challenge and swung a vicious blow at the chief's head. He ducked, and his shields took the brunt of the blow. He fired at point-blank range, not even bothering to aim. The elite reared and returned fire, and plasma blasts slashed through the narrow corridor. In one fluid motion, the chief drew, primed, and dropped a frag grenade practically at the elite's feet. The alien warbled in surprise as the Spartan spun and ducked back around the corner. He was rewarded by a flash of smoke and fire. A spray of purple-black blood splashed the metal wall. He rounded the corner, pistol at the ready, and stepped over the elite's smoking corpse. The chief continued along the corridor, which opened onto a narrow ledge. Directly to his right, the thick metal wall stretched up and out of sight. To his left, the metal sloped away at a steep angle that led back to the main floor, that gradually gave way to the yawning abyss as he continued forward. Ahead of him there was a pulsing glow, like the strobe of a pelican's running lights. He stopped at the source of the light. A pair of small glowing orbs hung suspended above a roughly rectangular frame of blue matte metal. Floating within the frame were a series of pulsing, shifting displays, semi-transparent. Like Cortana's holographic appearance, though there was no visible projection device, the display's shimmering geometric patterns nagged at him as if he should recognize them somehow. Even with his enhanced memory, he couldn't place where he had seen them before. They just seemed familiar. He reached a finger out to one of the symbols, a blue-green circle. The Spartan expected his finger to pass through nothing more than air. He was surprised when his finger met resistance and the panel lights began to pulse more quickly. "What did you do?" Cortana asked, her voice alarmed. "I'm detecting an energy spike." "I don't know," this Spartan admitted. He wasn't sure why he touched the button on the display. He just knew it felt right. There was a high-pitched whine, and from his vantage point he could see the gap in the roadway in the distance. At its edges, harsh white light sprang into view, forming a path across the brick in the road, like a flashlight beam in the smoke. The light brightened, and there was a tremendous ripping sound. "I'm showing a lot of photonic activity," Cortana said. "The excited photons have displaced the air around the light path, which means, she continued, that the light has become coherent, solid." She paused, then added, "How did you know what control to push?" "I didn't. Let's get the hell out of here." The ride across the light bridge was harrowing. He had tested the phenomenon with his foot and discovered that it was solid. It was as solid and unyielding as rock. Then he shrugged, told Fitzgerald to hang on, and sped the warthog directly at the beam of illumination. He could hear Fitzgerald alternate between cursing and praying as they drove over the seemingly bottomless chasm on nothing more than a beam of light. Once on the other side, they followed the tunnel out into the valley beyond, where the Master Chief guided the hog up through a scattering of rocks and trees to the top of a grassy rise. A sheer cliff threatened to block progress to the right, forcing them to stay to the left as they headed toward a gap to the south. The vehicle splashed through a shallow river. They saw the mouth of a passageway off to the right, decided that it would be best to investigate, and guided the all-terrain vehicle up through a rocky pass. It was only a matter of minutes before the warthog arrived on a ledge that looked out over a valley below. The Master Chief could see a UNSC lifeboat and a scattering of Covenant troops, but no Marines. Not a good sign. A vaguely pyramidal structure rose to dominate the very centre of the valley. The Master Chief saw a pulse of light race toward the sky and knew that the structure had to be similar to whatever caused the flash he had seen earlier. There was only a moment to take in the situation before the aliens opened fire and the gunner replied in kind. It was time to put the hog into motion. The Master Chief drove as the M41 LAAG whirred and rattled behind him. Marine Fitzgerald shouted, "You like that? Here, have some more," and fired. Another sustained burst. A pair of grunts rolled in opposite directions as a squat, long-armed jackal was cut in half, and the heavy caliber slugs blew divots out of the ground beyond. As the LRV swung past the pyramid, Cortana said, "There are submarines hiding up on the hill. Let's give them a hand." The Spartan aimed for a gap between two trees and saw a tall, angular elite step out from cover. The elite raised a weapon, but it was quickly transformed into a speed bump as the warthog knocked him down and the huge tires crushed his body. The Marines appeared soon after that, holding their assault weapons in the air and calling greetings. A sergeant nodded. "It's good to see you, Chief. It was starting to look a little bit warm around here." Covenant forces made a run at the hill after that, but the 12.7 x 99mm rounds made short work of them, and the slope was soon littered with their bodies. The Master Chief heard a burst of static followed by Fohammer's voice. Echo 419 to Cortana, come in. We read you, 419. We have survivors and need immediate dust-off. Roger, Cortana, on my way. I spotted additional lifeboats in your area. Acknowledged, Cortana answered. We're on our way. It took the better part of the afternoon to check the interlocking volleys, locate the rest of the survivors, and deal with the Covenant forces who attempted to interfere. But finally, having rounded up a total of 63 Marines and naval personnel, the Spartan watched Echo 419 land for the last time and jumped aboard. Fohammer looked back over her shoulder. You put in a long day, Chief. Nice job. Our ETA at Alpha Base is 30 minutes. Acknowledged, the Spartan said. He exhaled, then softened his clip tone. He allowed himself to lean back against the bulkhead and added, thanks for the ride. 30 seconds later, he was asleep. Captain Jacob Keyes stood, hands on knees, panting in front of a vertical cliff face. He and the rest of the command party had been running off and on for 3 hours. Even the Marines were exhausted as the shadow cast by the Covenant dropship drifted over them and blocked the sun. Keyes considered making use of Dofsky's pistol to fire at the aircraft, but couldn't summon the energy. The voice that boomed through the externally mounted speakers was all too familiar. Captain Keyes, this is Alan Dofsky. This is a box canyon. There's no place for you to run. You might as well pack it in. The darkness cast by the ship shifted as the aircraft lowered itself onto the bottom of the canyon. The engines howled and blew dust in all directions before eventually spooling down. A hatch opened and Dofsky jumped to the ground. She appeared to be unharmed and wore what could only be described as a self-satisfied smirk. You see, it's just like I told you it would be. A half-dozen veteran elites dropped to the ground, followed by abrasive grunts. All were heavily armed. Gravel crunched as they approached the cliff face. One of the aliens spoke, his booming voice warbling the human speech with detectable discomfort. You will drop your weapons, now. The command crew looked at Keyes. He shrugged, bent over, and laid the M6D on the ground. The others did likewise. The grunts scurried about and collected the weapons. One of them chortled in his own language as he collected all 3 of the Marines' assault weapons and carried them away. Which? The elite with the translator demanded, and looked at Dofsky. That one, the renegade officer proclaimed and pointed at Keyes. Hikawa started forward. You little bitch. No one ever learned what Hikawa would do because the elite shot her dead. Keyes lunged forward and attempted to tackle the elite, to no avail. A lightning fast blow clipped the side of his head, hard enough that his vision queered out. He fell to the dirt. The elite was methodical. Starting with the Marines, he shot each captured human in the head. Wang attempted to run, but a plasma bolt hit him between the shoulder blades. Lovell made a grab for the pistol and took a blast to the face. Keyes struggled to his feet again, dizzy and disoriented, and attempted to rush the elite. He was clubbed to the ground a second time. Hikawa's dead eyes stared vacantly back at him. Finally, after the last plasma bolt had been fired, and while the odour of burned flesh still hung in the air, only 2 members of the command crew were still alive, Keyes and Dofsky. The ensign was pale. She shook her head and wrung her hands. I didn't know, sir. Honest, I didn't. They told me. The elite snapped up a fallen M6D pistol and shot Dofsky. The bullet hit her in the centre of her forehead. The pistol's report echoed down the canyon. The ensign's eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed in a heap. The elite turned the M6D over in his hand. The weapon was small compared to his pistol, and his finger didn't fit easily inside the trigger guard. Projectiles. Very primitive. Take him away. Keyes felt the other elites grab him by the arms and drag him up a ramp into the dropship's murky interior. It seemed that the Covenant's rules had changed again. Now they did take prisoners. just not very many. The ship lifted, and the only human to survive, sincerely wished that he hadn't. So that's pretty cool because so that isn't in the game. So from reading this, we now know how Captain Keyes got captured by the Covenant. Alpha Base didn't offer a whole lot of amenities, but the Spartan took full advantage of what few there were. First came a full 10 hours of completely uninterrupted sleep, followed by components selected from 2 MREs or meals ready to eat, and a 2-minute hot shower. The water was provided by the ring itself. The heat was courtesy of a Covenant power plant, and the shower head had been fabricated by one of the techs from the Pillar of Autumn. Though brief, the shower felt good, very good, and the Spartan enjoyed every second of it. The Master Chief had dried off, scrounged a fresh set of utilities, and was just about to run a routine maintenance check on his armour when a private stuck his head into the Spartan's quarters, a prefab memory plastic cubicle that had replaced the archaic concepts of tents. "Sorry to bother you, Chief, but Major Silva would like to see you in the command post, on the double." The Spartan wiped his hands with a rag. "I'll be right there." The Master Chief was just about to take the armour off standby when the Marine reappeared. "One more thing. The Major said to leave your armour here." The Spartan frowned. He didn't like to be separated from his armour, especially in a combat zone, but an order was an order, and until he determined what had happened to Keyes, Silva was in command. He nodded. "Thank you, Private." He checked to ensure that his gear was squared away, activated the armour's security system, and buckled an M6D around his waist. The Major's office was located in Alpha Base's CP, the centremost of the alien structures at the top of the butte. He made his way through the halls and down a blood-stained corridor. A pair of manacled grunt POWs were hard at work, scrubbing the floor under the watchful eye of a Navy guard. 2 hell jumpers stood guard outside of Silva's door. Both looked extremely sharp for troopers who had been in combat the day before. They favoured the Spartan with the casually hostile look that members of the ODST reserved for anyone or anything that wasn't part of their elite organisation. The larger of the pair eyed the non-com's collar insignia. "Yeah, Chief, what can we do for you?" "Master Chief Spartan 117, reporting to Major Silva." Spartan 117 was the only official designation he had in the eyes of the military. It occurred to him that after Reach fell, there was no one left who knew his name was John. "Spartan 117? The smaller of the 2 Marines inquired. "What the hell kind of name is that?" "Look who's talking," McKay interrupted as she approached the Master Chief from behind. "That's a pretty strange question coming from a guy named Yutrezenika." Both of the hell jumpers laughed, and McKay waved the Spartan through the door. "Never mind those 2, Chief. They're jump happy. My name is McKay. Go on in." The Spartan said, "Thank you, ma'am," took 3 steps forward and found himself standing in front of a makeshift desk. Major Silva looked up from what he was doing and met the Master Chief's eyes. The Chief snapped to attention. "Sir, Master Chief Spartan 117, reporting as ordered, sir." The chair had been salvaged from a UNSC lifeboat. It made a gentle hissing noise as Silva leaned backward. He held a stylus, which he used to tap his lips. That was the moment when most officers would have said, "At ease," and the fact that he didn't was a clear indication that something was wrong. But what? McKay circled around to Silva's left, where she leaned on the wall and watched the scene through hooded eyes. She wore her hair hell jumper style, short on the sides to that the tattoos on her scalp could be seen, and flat on top. She had green eyes, a slightly flattened nose, and full lips. It managed to be both a soldier's face and a woman's face at the same time. When Silva spoke, it was as if he could read the Spartan's mind. "So, you're wondering who I am, and what this is all about. That's understandable, especially given your elite status, your close relationship with Captain Keyes, and the fact that we now know he has been captured. Loyalty is a fine thing, one of many virtues for which the military is known, and a quality I admire." Silva stood and started to pace back and forth behind his chair. "However, there is a chain of command, which means that you report to me, not to Keyes, not to Cortana, and not to yourself." The Marine stopped, turned, and looked at the Master Chief square in the eye. "I thought it would be a good idea for you and I to pull a comm check. So, here's the deal. I'm short a captain, so Lieutenant McKay is serving as my executive officer. If either one of us says crap, then I expect you to ask what colour, how much, and where do you want it. Do you read me?" The chief stirred for a moment and clenched his jaw. "Perfectly, sir." "Good. Now, one more thing. I'm familiar with your record and I admire it. You are one hell of a soldier. That said, you are also a freak. The last remaining subject in a terribly flawed experiment, and one which should never be repeated." McKay watched the Master Chief's face. His hair was worn short, and not as short as hers, but short. He had serious eyes, a firm mouth, and a strong jaw. His skin hadn't been exposed to the sun for a long time, and it was white, too white, like something that lived in the deep recesses of a cave. From what she had heard, he had been a professional soldier since the age of 6, which meant that he was an expert at controlling what showed on his face. But she could see the words hit like bullets striking a target. Nothing overt, just a slight narrowing of the eyes and a tightness around his mouth. She looked at Silva, but if the Major was aware of the changes, he didn't seem to care. The whole notion of selecting people at birth, screwing with their minds, and modifying their bodies is wrong. First, because the candidates have no choice. Second, because the subjects of the program are transformed into human aliens. And third, because the Spartan program fails. "Are you familiar with a man named Charles Darwin?" "No, probably not, because he never went to war. Darwin was a naturalist who proposed a theory called natural selection. Simply put, he believed that those species best equipped to survive would do so, while other, less effective organisms would eventually die out. That's what happened to the Spartans, Chief. They died out, or will, once you're gone. And that's where the ODST comes in. It was the hell jumpers who took this butt, son, not a bunch of augmented freaks dressed in fancy armour. When we push the Covenant back, which I sincerely believe we will, that victory will be the result of work by men and women like Lieutenant McKay, human beings who are razor sharp, metal tough, and green to the core. Do you read me?" The Master Chief remembered Linda, James, and all the rest of the 73 boys and girls with whom he learned to fight, all dead, all labelled as freaks, all dismissed as having been part of a failed experiment. He took a deep breath. "Sir, no, sir." There was a long moment of silence as the two men stared into each other's eyes. Finally, after a good 5 seconds had elapsed, the Major nodded. "I understand. ODSTs are loyal to our dead as well. But that doesn't change the facts. The Spartan program is over. Human beings will win this war, so you might as well get used to it. In the meantime, we need every warrior we have, especially those who have more medals than the entire general staff put together." Then, as if some sort of switch had been thrown, the ODST officer's entire demeanour changed. He said, "At ease," invited both of his guests to sit down, and proceeded to brief the Master Chief on his upcoming mission. The Covenant had Captain Keyes' recon had confirmed it, and Silva was determined to get him back. Though their ship had been damaged by the Pillar of Autumn during her brief rampage through the system, the Covenant's engineers were hard at work making repairs to the Truth and Reconciliation, now hovering only a few hundred units off Halo's surface. The ship had become a sort of de facto headquarters for those assigned to harvest the Ringworld's technology. The warship was at the very center of the command structure's activities. The corridors were thick with officer elites, Major Jekylls, and veteran grunts. There was also a scattering of engineers, amorphous-looking creatures held aloft by gas bladders, who had a savant-like ability to dismantle, repair, and reassemble any complex technology. But all of them, regardless of how senior they might be, hurried to get out of the way as Zuka Zamami marched through the halls, closely followed by a reluctant Yayap, not because of his rank, but because of his appearance and the message it sent. The arrogant tilt of his head, the space black armor, and the steady click-clack of his heels all seemed to radiate confidence and authority. Still formidable as Zamami was, no one was allowed onto the command deck without being screened, and no less than 6 black-clad elites were waiting when he and his aide stepped off the gravity lift. If these elites were intimidated by their fellows' demeanor, they gave no sign of it. Identification, one of them said brusquely, and extended his hand. Zamami dropped his disc into the other warrior's hand with the air of someone who was conferring a favor on a lesser being. The security officer accepted Zamami's identity disc and dropped it into a handheld reader. Data appeared and scrolled from right to left. Place your hand in the slot. The second machine took the form of a rectangular black box which stood about 5 units high. Green light spread out of a slot located in the structure's side. Zamami did as instructed, felt a sudden stab of pain as the machine sampled his tissue, and knew that a computer was busy comparing his DNA with that on file. Not because he might be human, but because politics were rife within the Covenant, and there had been a few assassinations of late. Confirmed, the elite said. It appears as though you are the same Zuka Zamami that's scheduled to meet with the Council of Masters 15 units from now. The Council is running behind the schedule, however, so you'll have to wait. Please hand all personal weapons to me. There's a waiting room over there, but the grunt will have to remain outside. You will be called when the Council is ready. Though not burdened by his energy rifle, which he had given to Yayap to carry, the elite did have a plasma pistol, which he surrendered but first. Zamami made his way into the makeshift holding area and discovered that a number of other beings had been forced to wait as well. Most sat hunched over, kept to themselves, and stared at the deck. Making matters even worse was the fact that rather than first come, first served, it seemed as though rank definitely had its privileges and the most senior penitents were seen first. Not that the elite could complain. Had it not been for his rank, the council would never have agreed to see him at all. But finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Zamami was ushered into the chamber where the command council had convened. A minor prophet sat, legs folded, at the center of a table which curved around a podium at which the elite was clearly expected to stand. Whenever a gust of air hit the exalted one, he seemed to bob slightly, suggesting that rather than sit on a chair, he preferred to let his anti-grav belt support him, either as a matter of habit or as a stratagem designed to remind others of who and what he was. Something Zamami not only understood, but admired. The prophet wore a complex headpiece. It was set with gemstones and wired for communications. A silver mantle rested on his shoulders and supported a fancifully woven cluster of gold wires, which extended forward to place a microphone in front of his bony lips. Richly embroidered red robes cascaded down over his lap and fell to the deck. Obsidian black eyes tracked the elite all the way to the podium, while an assistant whispered in his ear. The other elite, an aristocrat named Soha Rulami, raised a hand palm outward. I greet you, Zamami. How's your wound? Healing nicely, I hope. Rulami outranked Zamami by 2 full levels. The junior officer gloried in the respectful manner with which the other elite had greeted him. Thank you, Excellency. I will heal. Enough, the prophet said officiously. We're running late, so let's get on with it. Zuka Zamami comes before the council seeking special dispensation to take leave of the unit he commands in order to locate and kill one particular human, a rather strange notion since all of them look alike and are equally annoying. However, according to our records, this particular human is responsible for hundreds of Covenant casualties. The council notes that Officer Zamami was wounded during an encounter with this human and reminds Officer Zamami that the Covenant has no tolerance for personal vendettas. Please keep that in mind as you make your case and be mindful of the time. A measure of brevity will serve you well. Zamami lowered his eyes as a signal of respect. Thank you, Excellency. Our spies suspect that the individual in question was raised to be a warrior from a very young age, surgically altered to enhance his abilities, and furnished with armor which may be superior to our own. Better than our own, the prophet inquired, his tone making it clear that he considered such a possibility extremely unlikely. Mind your words, Officer Zamami. The technology underlying the armor you wear came straight from the forerunners. To say that is in any way inferior verges on sacrilege. Still, what Zamami says is true, Rolami put in. The files are full of reports which, though contradictory in some cases, all make mention of one or more humans clad in reactive special armor. Assuming that the eyewitness accounts are accurate, it appears that this individual or group of individuals can absorb a great deal of punishment without suffering personal injury, have exceptional combat skills, and demonstrate superior leadership capabilities. Wherever he or they appear, other humans rally and fight with renewed vigor. Exactly, Zamami said gratefully, which is why I recommend that a special hunter-killer team be commissioned to find the human and retrieve his armor for analysis. Noted, the prophet said gravely. Withdraw while the council confers. Zamami had little choice but to lower his eyes, back away from the podium and turn to the door. Once out in the hallway, the elite was required to wait for only a few units before his name again was called, and he was ushered back into the room. Zamami saw that both the prophet and the second elite had disappeared, leaving Rolami to deliver the news. The other officer stood as if to reduce the width of the social gap that separated them. I regret, Zamami, that the prophet places little weight on the reports, labelling them combat-induced hysteria. More than that, we all agree that you are far too valuable an asset to expend on a single target. Your request has been denied. Zamami knew that Rolami had invented the far too valuable aspect of his report in order to cushion the blow, but appreciated the intent behind the words. Though severely disappointed, he was a soldier, and that meant following orders. He lowered his eyes. Yes, Excellency. Thank you, Excellency. Yayap saw the elite emerge, read the slight droop of his shoulders, and knew his prayers had been answered. The council had denied the elite's insane request. He would be allowed to return to his unit, and life would return to normal. If Zamami had been intimidating on his way to see the council, he was a good deal less so on his way out. He walked even faster, however, forcing Yayap to break into a run. The grunt weaved his way through the foot traffic arrayed in front of him and struggled to keep pace with Zamami. Yayap squealed in surprise when he slammed into the back of Zamami's armoured legs. The elite had come to a sudden halt. The grunt noticed with unease that his new master's hands were clenched. He followed Zamami's gaze and spotted a group of 4 jackals. They dragged a uniformed human between them. Keyes had just been interrogated for the 3rd time. Some sort of neural shock treatment had been administered to make him talk, and his nerve endings continued to buzz as the aliens prodded his back, yelled incomprehensible gibberish into his ears, and laughed at his discomfort. He tasted his own blood. The procession came to a sudden stop as an elite in black combat armour blocked the way. pointed a long, slender finger at the human and said, "You, tell me where I can find the human who wears the special armor." Keyes looked up, struggled to focus his eyes, and faced the alien. He saw the dressing and guessed the rest. "I don't have the foggiest idea," he said. He managed a weak smile. "But the next time you run into him, you might consider ducking." Sam and me took a full step forward and backhanded the human across the face. Keyes staggered, recovered his balance, and wiped a trace of blood away from the corner of his mouth. He locked eyes with the alien for the second time. "Go ahead, shoot me." Yap saw the elite consider doing just that, as his right hand went to the pistol, touched the butt, and fell away. Then, without another word, Zamami walked away. The grunt followed, somehow by means Yap wasn't quite sure of. The human had won. That's the end of chapter 3. Okay, starting to get brighter, so I think I'll go around and open the windows. Still a bit dark, but I think that'll change. I think that will change within the next half hour or so. Alright, in the next half hour my alarm is going to go off to let me know to wake up. But I already woke up early, so I need it. Silly me. If you hear cooing, that's just the noise of pigeons outside. Okay. So I'm on page 99, chapter 4. Let's see how long chapter 4 is. And I think this will be it for... So I'll try and finish chapter 4, and then next stream I'll do 5 and 6. Ooh, the silent cartographer. It's chapter 5. Cool. So the silent cartographer. So if anybody's played the game, that's the part after the Truth and Reconciliation, which means chapter 4 is, Master Chief rescuing Captain Keyes. I think this is the third level. So the first level was the Pillar of Autumn, and then the second one was on Halo, and then the third one was the Truth and Reconciliation, and then so it looks like we're on to the third level, chapter 4. D plus 17 1104. Spartan 117 mission clock, Pelican Echo 419 in flight. Recon flights conducted the day before had revealed that the sensors aboard Covenant vessel Truth and Reconciliation might have a blind spot downspin of the alien vessel's current position, where a small mountain rose to block the electronic view. Even more important, Wellesley had concocted an array of signals designed to trick the Covenant technicians into believing that any UNSC dropship was actually one of their own, 50 meters above the deck, and cloaked in electronic camouflage. The Master Chief and a Pelican load of hell jumpers waited to find out if their ruse would work. Okay, so if the stream ever cuts out suddenly, it's not my fault, but it's to do with the connection somewhere. So it's either Twitch's connection, or my internet, or OBS, or anything. So if it ever cuts out, then I'll just leave it, and then I'll continue later, of course. Right, so only time would tell if the fake signals were effective. One thing was for certain. Though conceived for the express purpose of rescuing Captain Keyes, the mission put together by Silva, Wellesley, and Cortana bore still another, even more important purpose. If the rescue team did manage to penetrate a Covenant vessel and successfully remove a prisoner, the human presence on the Halo would be transformed from an attempt merely to survive into a full-fledged resistance movement. The ship shuddered as it hit a series of air pockets, then swayed from side to side as the pilot, who referred to herself as Fohammer, wove back and forth through an obstacle course of low-lying hills. The Master Chief took the opportunity to assess the Marines seated around him. They were hell jumpers, the same people Silva said would ultimately win the war, relegating freaks like himself to the dustbin of history. Maybe Silva was right. Maybe the Spartan program would end with him. But that didn't matter. Not here, not now. The Marines would help him take out the sentries, cope with weapons emplacements, and reach the gravity lift located directly below the Truth and Reconciliation's belly, and he was glad to have their help. Even with the element of surprise, plus support from the ODST troops, things were likely to be pretty hot by the time they made it to the lift. That's when the second dropship would land and discharge a group of regular Marines that would join the assault on the ship itself. There was some concern that the Truth and Reconciliation might simply lift at that point, but Cortana had been monitoring Covenant communications and was convinced that critical repairs were still being made to the alien's cruiser. Assuming that they were able to reach the gravity lift, meet up with their reinforcements, and fight their way aboard the ship, all they had to do was find keys, eliminate an unknown number of hostiles, and show up for the dust-off. A walk in the park. Fohammer's voice came over the intercom. "We are 5 to dirt. Repeat, 5 to dirt." That was Sergeant Parker's cue to stand and eye his troops. His voice came over the team frequency and grated on the Spartans' ears. "All right, boys and girls, lock and load. The Covenant is throwing a party and you're invited. Remember, the Master Chief goes in first, so take your cues from him. I don't know about you, but I like having a swabby on point." There was general laughter. Parker gave the Spartan a thumbs up, and he offered the same gesture in return. It felt good to have some backup for a change. He mentally reviewed the plan, which called for him to insert ahead of the Helljumpers and clear a path with his S2 AM sniper's rifle. Once the outer defences were cleared, the Marines would move up. Then, once the element of surprise had been lost, the Master Chief planned to switch to his MA5B assault rifle for close-in work. Like the rest of the grenades and other gear, plus 2 magazines for the M19 launchers. 30 seconds to dirt, Fohammer announced. "Shoot some of the bastards for me." As the Pelican hovered a foot above the surface, Parker yelled, "Go, go, go," and the Master Chief sprang down the ramp. He sidestepped and swept the area. The Helljumpers thundered down the ramp and onto the ground, right behind him. It was dark, which meant they had nothing beyond the light reflected off the moon that hung in the sky and the glow of Covenant work lights to guide them to their objective. Seconds later, Echo 419 was airborne again. The pilot turned down the spin, fed fuel to her engines, and disappeared into the night. The Master Chief heard the aircraft pass over his head, gathered his bearings, and spotted a footpath off to the right. The ODST troops spread out to either side as Parker and a 3 Marine fire team turned to cover the Group 6. He crept along the rocky footpath, which rose to a 2-meter-high embankment. As he neared a cluster of rocks, Cortana warned the Spartan of enemy activity ahead. A host of red dots appeared on his motion sensor. Several meters ahead and to the left was a deep pit, some kind of excavation, judging from the Covenant work lights that dotted the area with pools of illumination. He briefly wondered what the aliens were looking for. He clicked the rifle safety off. What they were looking for didn't matter. In the end, he'd make sure they never lived to find it. The Master Chief found the patch of cover next to a tree, raised the rifle and used the scope's 2x and night optics setting to find the Covenant gun emplacements located on the far side of the depression. There were lots of grunts, jackals and elites in the area, but it was imperative to neutralize the plasma cannons, known as shades, before the Marines moved out into the open. His Mjolnir armor and shields could handle a limited amount of the Shade's plasma fire. The Helljumpers' ballistic armor, on the other hand, just couldn't handle that kind of firepower. Once both Shades had been located, the Spartan switched to the 10x setting, practiced the move from one target to the next and tried it yet again. Once he was sure that he could switch targets quickly enough, he exhaled quietly, then held his breath. His hand squeezed the trigger and the rifle kicked against his shoulder. The first shot took the nearest gunner in the chest. As the grunt tumbled from the Shade's seat, the Master Chief panned the rifle to the right and put a 14.5mm round through the second grunt's pointy head. The rifle's booming report alerted the Covenant, and they returned fire. He moved forward along the low ridge and took a new firing position behind the scaly bark of a tree. The rifle barked twice more, and a pair of jackals fell. He reloaded with practiced ease and continued sniping. Without the shades to support them, the enemy fell in ones, twos, and threes. The Master Chief reloaded again, fired until there were no more targets of opportunity, and made the switch to his assault rifle. He jumped down into the open pit and crouched behind a large boulder, one of several that were strewn around the depression. "Hell jumpers, move up," he barked into the radio. In seconds, the ODSTs charged into the pit. As the lead soldiers entered, a trio of grunts burst from hiding, shot one of the Marines in the face, and tried to run. The Hell jumper's body hadn't even hit the ground before the Spartan and another ODST hosed the aliens with bullets. The gunshots echoed through the twisting canyons, then faded. The Spartan frowned. There was no way the fracas would go unnoticed. The element of surprise was gone. There was no time to waste. The Master Chief led the Hell jumpers through the depression, up a hill on the far side of the pit, and along the side of a sheer cliff face. He stayed close to this rock wall on his right, mindful of the sheer drop that awaited any who strayed too far to the left. He could just make out the glint of moonlight on a massive ocean far below him. His motion sensor pinged to contacts, and he waved the ODSTs to a halt. He crouched behind a clump of brush at the top of the cliff path, conscious of the massive drop on the other side. A pair of jackals rounded the bend ahead, their overcharged plasma pistols pulsing green, and paid dearly for their enthusiasm. "Oh, hey." I'm on to chapter 4 now. Okay. So, chapter 4 is the third level in Halo, in the first game. The Spartan sprang from his cover and slammed the butt of his rifle into the nearest jackal's shield. The energy field flared and died, and the force of the blow sent the alien tumbling off the path. The alien screamed and plummeted off the cliff. The chief pivoted and fired his rifle from the hip. The burst struck the second alien in the side. The jackal slammed to the ground as his finger tightened on his weapon's trigger as he died. A massive hole blossomed in the rock above the Master Chief's head. He slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon and continued to advance. "Here's a little something to remember me by," one of the Marines growled, and shot each jackal in the head. As the team continued up the path, they encountered another shade, more grunts, and a pair of jackals, all of whom seemed to melt away under the combined assault by the Master Chief's sniper rifle, the Marines' assault weapons, and a few well-placed grenades. Yeah, so I'm on page 104 now. So, making progress. So first stream I read the prologue chapter and chapter 1, and then the connection dropped, and I did manage to reconnect after I lost connection, but then I noticed that I had to go soon. So I thought, there's no point in reconnecting and continuing. I'll just leave it till later. Yesterday it was an okay day. I went for a walk for like 2.5 miles to try and do some exercise. I was uh, sweating like crazy when I got back. Got to birthday cards in town, um, and yeah, I was my dad and sister and me were invited out to my brother's house for dinner, but I was too tired, so I didn't go out. I stayed here and decided to. At first, I was only going to sleep for like an hour or two, but then I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just stay here and sleep. So I was like sleeping from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right through till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I thought, right, I'll just since I can't sleep anymore, I'll just start another stream, and hopefully it'll go better. Um, so the last time it streamed, it it stopped just before I was about to finish chapter one. So this stream so far I've read chapter two, I've read chapter three, and I'm hoping to finish chapter four here, and then after that point I'm hoping to do two chapters each stream. There's only 12 chapters, but they're quite big. Um, there's quite a lot to them, and if this stream goes well and there's no warnings, I didn't get any warnings from the first one, so it's all going well. So if this goes well and there's no warnings at all, and it works out good, then then it means I can go ahead and do the Resident Evil ones, and the Resident Evil ones are going to be cool because the books are cool because they uh, kind of fill in the gaps between certain points. So like in Halo, for example, um, you play as the Master Chief, and then you do one level, and then immediately it's on to the next level. But then there's some things where it's like, so like Captain Keyes, he ends up getting captured, and then in the third level, you have to try and rescue him. So that's the part I'm reading now. Um, so in the previous chapter, it tells you how he got captured, whereas that isn't in the games. So yeah. Yeah, that's why I was up so early. Yay! And the chat is on the screen as well. And I decided to make the background purple to match Twitch. Okay, so and then I've got my fingers like this, because this is how many pages left for chapter four. Quite a lot. Oh yeah, purple is a good color. All right. The rescue force pressed on toward the lights beyond. The Covenant resistance was determined but spotty, and before long the Master Chief could hear the thrumming sound of the alien ship as it hovered more than 100 meters above them. His skin crackled with static electricity. In the center of a steep dip in the rock lay a large metal disc, the gravity lift that the Covenant used to move troops, supplies, and vehicles to and from the ringworld surface. Purple light shimmered around the platform where the beam was anchored. "Come on," the Master Chief shouted, pointing at the lift. "That's our way in. Let's move." There was a mad dash through a narrow canyon, followed by a pitched battle as the Master Chief and the Helljumpers entered the area directly below the ship. The depression was ringed with shades, and all of them opened fire at once. The chief made use of the sniper rifle to kill the nearest gunner, charged up the intervening slope, and jumped into the now vacant seat. The first order of business was to silence the other guns. He yanked the control yoke to the left, and the gun swiveled to face a second shade across the defile. A glowing image of a hollow triangle floated in front of his face. When it lined up with the other gun, it flashed red. He thumbed the firing studs, and lances of purple-white energy lashed the enemy emplacement. The grunt gunner struggled to leap free of his shade, fell into the path of the Spartan's fire, and was speared by a powerful blast. He slumped against the base of his abandoned shade. A smoking hole burned through his chest. The Master Chief swiveled the captured gun and took aim on the remaining shades. He hosed the targets with a hellish wave of destructive energy, then, satisfied that the emplacements were silenced, went to work on enemy ground troops. He had just burned a pair of jackals to the ground when Cortana announced that a Covenant dropship was inbound, and the Master Chief was forced to shift his fire to the alien aircraft and the troops that spilled out onto the ground. The human walked the blue shade. The human walked the blue shade far across the aliens, cutting them down and pounding what remained into mush. He was still at it when a Marine yelled, "Look at that! There's more of them!" and a dozen figures floated down through the gravity lift. A pair of the newcomers were huge and wore steel blue armor, as well as a handheld plate armor shields. The chief had faced such creatures before, not long before Reach left. The chief had faced such creatures before, not long before Reach fell. Covenant hunters were tough, dangerous foes, practically walking tanks. They were slow and appeared clumsy, but the cannons mounted on their arms were equivalent to the heavy weapons a Banshee carried, and they could leap into motion with a startling suddenness. Their metal shields could withstand a tremendous amount of punishment. Worse, they would never stop until the enemy lay dead at their feet, or they were dead themselves. The hell jumpers opened fire, grenades exploded, and the pair of hunters roared defiance. One of them lifted his right arm and fired his weapon, a fuel rod gun. One of the ODSTs screamed and fell, his flesh melting. The Marine's rocket fired into the air, slid into the gravlift beam, and detonated harmlessly. The hunters lumbered from the gravlift and strode up the edge of the pit. Behind them, a swarm of jackals and elites formed a rough phalanx and peppered the human positions with plasma fire. Sergeant Parker yelled, "Hit him, hell jumpers!" and the ODSTs poured fire onto the massive alien juggernauts. Bullets pinged from their armor and whined through the rocks. The Spartan swiveled around and heard a warning tone as a hunter's weapon discharged. Burning energy smashed into him. The shade shook under the force of the incoming fire as the Master Chief clenched his jaw and forced himself to bring the targeting reticle down onto the target. His shield bled energy and began to shriek a shrill alarm. The instant the targeting display pulsed red, he mashed down the firing studs and unleashed a flood of incandescent blue light. The hunter didn't have time to bring its shield fully into play, and plasma blasts burned through multiple layers of armor and exited through his spine. The Spartan heard a cry of what sounded like anguish as the second alien saw his Bond brother fall. The hunter spun and fired his fuel rod gun at the Master Chief's captured emplacement. The shade took a direct hit, flipped over onto its side, and threw him to the ground. The ground vibrated as the enraged alien charged up the slope, right for the downed Spartan. The chief rolled to his right and came up in a low crouch. The alien was close now, within 5 meters. A row of razor-sharp spines sprang up along the hunter's back. With his shields depleted, the chief knew that those spines could cut him in two. He dropped to one knee and unslung his assault rifle. Bullets bounced harmlessly from the alien's armor. At the last second, he dodged left and slid down the slope. The hunter didn't anticipate the move, and the razor spines passed over the Spartan's head, missing him by mere inches. The chief rolled on his belly and saw his opportunity. A patch of orange, leathery skin was visible along the hunter's curved spine. He emptied the MA5B's magazine into the unprotected target, and thick orange blood gouted from a cluster of bullet wounds. The hunter gave a low, keening wail, then collapsed in a puddle of his own gore. He rose to one knee, fed a fresh magazine into the assault rifle, and scanned the area for enemies. All clear, he called out. The remaining ODSTs called in all clears as well. That opened the way to the lift, and Cortana was quick to seize on the opportunity. She activated the armor's communication system. Cortana to Echo 419. We made it to the gravity lift and are ready for reinforcements. Copy that, Cortana. Echo 419 inbound. Clear the drop zone. What's the matter? Sergeant Parker demanded of his troops, several of whom were looking longingly at the fast-approaching Pelicans running in strobes. Never seen a UNSC dropship before? Keep your eyes on the rocks, damn it. That's where the bastards will come from. The Spartan waited for Echo 419 to unload the fresh Marines, waved them forward, and joined the surviving hell jumpers on the lift. Looks like we made it, a private said, just before an invisible hand reached down to pluck him off the surface. Sergeant Parker looked up toward the belly of the ship and said, "Aren't we the lucky ones?" then rose as if suspended from a rope. "Once we're in the ship, I can home in on the captain's command neural interface," Cortana said. "The CNI will lead us to him. He'll probably be in or near the ship's brig." "I'm glad to hear it," the chief answered dryly, and felt the beam pull him upward. Someone else yelled, "Yeehaw!" and vanished into the belly of the ship. The Covenant didn't realize it yet, but the Marines had landed. Yeehaw! None of the humans understood, much less had the ability to predict the ring world's weather. So when the big drops of blood-warm rain fell on the mesa, it came as a complete surprise. The hell jumpers grumbled as the water streamed off their faces, soaked their uniforms, and started to pool on the surface of the landing pad. McKay saw things differently, however. She liked the wet stuff, not just because it felt good on her skin, but because bad weather would offer the insertion team that much more cover. "Listen up, people," Sergeant Lister bellowed. "You know the drill. Let's shake, rattle, and roll." There weren't many lights, just enough so that people could move around without running into one another. But the fact that Silva had been on such missions himself meant that he could visualize what his eyes couldn't see. The troopers carried a full combat load, which meant that their packs were festooned with weapons, ammo, and grenades, flares, radios, and med packs, all of which would make noise unless properly secured. Noise would bring a whole world of trouble down on their heads during an op. That's why Lister passed through the ranks and forced each Marine to jump up and down. Anything that clicked, squeaked, or rattled was identified, restowed, taped, or otherwise fastened into place. Once all the troops had passed inspection, the hell jumpers would board the waiting dropships for a short flight to the point where the Pillar of Autumn had crashed. The Covenant had placed guards in and around the fallen cruiser, so McKay and her Marines would have to retake the ship long enough to fill the extensive shopping list that Silva had given her. According to Wellesley, Napoleon once said, "What makes the general's task so difficult is the necessity of feeding so many men and animals." Silva didn't have any animals to feed, but he did have a flock of pelicans, and the essence of the problem was the same. But with the exception of the ODST troopers who carried extra supplies in their HEVs, the rest of the Navy and Marine personnel had bailed out of the autumn with very little in the way of supplies. Obtaining more of everything and doing it before the Covenant launched an all-out attack on Alpha Base would be the key to survival. Later, assuming there was a leader, the infantry officer would have to find a way to get his people the hell off the ring world. Silva's thoughts were interrupted as Echo 419 raced in over the mesa, flared nose up, and settled onto what had been designated as Pod 3. The assault on the Truth and Reconciliation had gone well so far, which meant that Second Lieutenant Dalu, who had been assigned to follow along behind the rescue team and scoop up everything he could, was having a good evening. Each time Echo 419 dropped a load of troops, she brought enemy arms and equipment back in. Plasma rifles, plasma pistols, needlers, power packs, hand tools, comm equipment, and even food packs. Dalu loved them all. Silva grinned as the lieutenant waved a team of naval tacks in under the Pelican's belly to take delivery of the shade he and his team had lifted right out from under the Covenant's collective noses. That was the third gun acquired since the beginning of the operation, and would soon take its place within the but steadily growing air defence system. Sergeant Lister shouted, "Attention!" did a smart about-face and saluted Lieutenant McKay. She returned the salute and said, "At ease." Silva walked out into the rain and felt it pelt his face. He turned to look at the ranks of black, brown and white faces. All he saw were Marines. Most, if not all of you, are familiar with my office aboard the Pillar of Autumn. In the rush to leave, it seems that I left a full bottle of scotch in the lower left-hand drawer of my desk. If one or more of you would be so kind as to retrieve that bottle, not only would I be extremely grateful, I would show my gratitude by sharing it with the person or persons who managed to bring it in. There was a roar of approval. Lister shouted them down. "Silence! Corporal, take that man's name." The corporal to whom this order was directed had no idea which name he was supposed to take down, but knew it didn't matter. Silva knew the Hell Jumpers had been briefed and understood the true purpose of the mission, so he brought his remarks to a close. "Good luck out there. I'll see you in a couple of days." Except that he wouldn't see them, not all of them. Good commanding officers had to love their men and still be willing to order their deaths if needed. It was the aspect of command he hated the most. The formation was dismissed. The Marines jogged up into the back of the waiting Pelicans, and the dropships soon disappeared into the blackness of the night. Silva remained on the pad until the sound of the engines could no longer be heard. Then, conscious of the fact that every war must be won on the equivalent of paper before it can be won on the ground, he turned back toward the low-lying structure that housed his command post. The night was still young, and there was plenty of work left to do. The gravity lift deposited the rescue team 3 feet above the deck. They hung suspended for a moment, then fell. Parker gave a series of hand signals, and the ODSTs crept forward into the lift bay. The Covenant equivalent of gear crates, tapered rectangular boxes made from the shimmering, striated purple metal the aliens favoured, were stacked around the high compartment. A pair of Covenant tanks. Wraiths were lined. A pair of Covenant tanks, Wraiths, were lined along the right side of the bay. The Master Chief moved forward toward one of the high metal doors that were spaced along the perimeter of the compartment. Parker gave the all-clear signal, and the Marines relaxed a bit. "There's no Covenant here," one of them whispered. "So where the hell are they?" The door was proximity activated, and as he neared the portal, it slid open and revealed the surprised elite. Without pause, the Spartan tackled the alien and slammed its armoured head into the burnished deck plates. With luck, he had finished the elite quietly enough. Another set of doors flashed open on the other side of the bay, and Covenant troops boiled into the compartment. A second Marine turned to the corporal who had just spoken. "No Covenant," he snarled, mocking his fellow trooper. You just had to open your mouth, didn't you?" Inside the Covenant ship, chaos reigned. The Master Chief charged ahead, and the rescue team fought their way through a maze of interlocking corridors, which eventually emerged into a large shuttle bay. A Covenant dropship passed through a bright blue force field as all hell broke loose. Fire stuttered down from a platform above. A marine took a flurry of needles in the chest and was torn in half by the ensuing explosion. A grunt dropped from above and landed on a corporal's shoulders. The marine reached up and got a grip on the alien's methane rig and jerked the device off. The grunt started to wheeze, fell to the deck and flopped around like a fish. Someone shot him. Numerous hatches opened into the bay, and additional Covenant troops poured in from every direction. Parker stood up and motioned his men forward. "It's party time," he bellowed. He spun and opened fire, and was soon joined by all the rest. Within a matter of seconds, what seemed like a dozen different firefights had broken out. Wounded and dead, humans and Covenant alike, littered the deck. The Master Chief was careful to keep his back to a marine, a pillar, or the nearest bulkhead. His Mjolnir armor and the recharging shield it carried provided the Spartan with an advantage that none of the Marines possessed, so he focused most of his attention on the elites, leaving the jackals and grunts for others to handle. Cortana, meanwhile, was hard at work, tapping into the ship's electronic nervous system in an attempt to find the best way out of the trap. "We need a way out of this bay now," the Master Chief told her, "or there won't be anyone left to complete the mission." He ducked behind a crate, emptied his magazine into a charging grunt who wielded a plasma grenade, then paused to reload. Need a drink. Yep, plenty of water. I think I've had like 2 cups of coffee as well. We're back feeding the cat and grabbing a drink. Yes. Water. See, where was I? He ducked behind a crate, emptied his magazine into a charging grunt who wielded a plasma grenade, then paused to reload. A hunter gave a blood-curdling roar as it charged into the fray. The Spartan turned and saw Sergeant Parker fire at the massive alien. A trio of bullets spat from his assault rifle, the last 3 rounds in the weapon. He discarded the empty gun and backpedaled in an attempt to buy himself some time. His hand dipped for his sidearm. The hunter sprang forward, and the tips of the beast's razor spines shredded through the Marine's ballistic armor. He crashed to the deck. The Master Chief cursed under his breath, slapped a fresh clip into place, racked a round into the chamber, and took aim on the hunter. The alien was coming on fast, too fast, and the Spartan knew he wasn't going to get a kill shot in time. The hunter stepped past Sergeant Parker's prone form. The alien's razor spines sprang into view, and it roared again as the Spartans sprayed it with gunfire. Knowing the gesture was futile, but unwilling to let the enemy at his teammate's exposed flank. Without warning, the hunter reared up, howled, and crashed to the ground. The Master Chief was puzzled and briefly checked his weapon. Could he have gotten in a lucky shot? He heard a cough and saw Sergeant Parker struggling to his feet, a smoking M6D pistol in his hand. Blood flowed from the gashes in his side, and he was unsteady on his feet. But he found the strength to spit on the hunter's fallen corpse. The chief took a covering position near the wounded sergeant. He gave him a brisk nod. Not bad for a Marine, thanks. The sergeant grabbed a fallen assault rifle, slammed a fresh magazine into place, and grinned. Any time, Swabby. His motion sensors showed more contacts inbound, but they were keeping their distance. Their field assault on the bay must have left them disorganized. Good, he thought. We need all the time we can get. Cortana, he said. How much longer before you get a door open? Got it, Cortana proclaimed exultantly. One of the heavy doors hissed open. Everyone should move through the door now. I can't guarantee that it won't lock when it closes. Follow me, he barked, then led the surviving Marines out of the shuttle bay and into the comparative safety of a corridor beyond. The next 15 minutes were like a slow-motion nightmare as the rescuers fought their way through a maze of corridors, up a series of narrow ramps, and onto the launch bay's upper level. With Cortana's guidance, they plunged back into the ship's oppressive passageways. As they proceeded through the bowels of the large warship, Cortana finally gave them good news. The captain's signal is strong. He must be close. The chief frowned. This was taking too long. Every passing second made it that much less likely that any of the rescue party would be able to get off the Truth and Reconciliation alive, let alone with Captain Keyes. The ODSTs were good fighters, but they were slowing them down. He turned to Sergeant Parker and said, "Hold your men here. I'll be back soon with the captain." She started to protest, then nodded. "Don't tell Silva," she said. "I won't." The Master Chief ran from door to door until one of them opened to reveal a rectangular room lined with cells. It appeared with the translucent force fields served in place of bars. He dashed inside and called the captain's name, but received no answer. A quick check confirmed that, with the exception of one dead Marine, the detention centre was empty. Frustrated yet reassured by Cortana's insistence that the CNI signal remained strong, the Spartan exited the room, entered the hall, and literally went door to door, searching for the correct hatch. Once he located it, the Master Chief almost wished he hadn't. The portal slid open. A grunt yelled something the Master Chief couldn't understand, and a plasma beam lashed past the human's helmet. The Master Chief opened fire, heard a Marine yell from within one of the cells. "Good to see you, Chief," and knew he was in the right place. A plasma beam appeared out of nowhere, hit the Spartan in the chest, and triggered the armor's audible alarm. He ducked behind a support column, just in time to see an energy beam slice through the spot he had just vacated. He scanned the room, looking for his assailant. Nothing. His motion sensors showed faint trace movements, but he couldn't spot their source. His eyes narrowed, and he noticed a slight shimmer in the air directly in front of him. He fired a sustained burst through the middle of it, and was rewarded with a loud howl. The elite seemed to materialize out of thin air, made a grab for his own entrails, and managed to catch them before he died. He strode to the access controls and, with Cortana's help, killed the force fields. Captain Keyes stepped out of his cell, paused to scoop a needler off the floor, and met the chief's eyes. "Coming here was reckless," he said, his voice harsh. The chief was about to explain his orders when Keyes' expression warmed and the Autumn's CO smiled. "Thanks." The Spartan nodded. "Any time, sir." "Can you find your way out?" Keyes inquired doubtfully. The corridors of this ship are like a maze." "It shouldn't be too difficult," the Master Chief replied. "All we have to do is follow the bodies." Lieutenant Cookie Peterson put Echo 136 down a full click from the Pillar of Autumn, looked out through the rain-splattered windscreen, and saw Echo 206 settle in approximately 50 meters away. It had been an uneventful flight, thanks in part to the weather, and the fact that the assault on the Truth and Reconciliation had probably served to distract the Covenant from what was going on elsewhere. Peterson felt the ship shudder as the ramp hit the ground, waited for the crew chief to call clear, and fired the Pelican's thrusters. The ship was extremely vulnerable while on the ground, and he was eager to return to the relative safety of Alpha Base. Then, assuming the Helljumpers got the job done, he and his crew would be back to transport some of the survivors and their loot. Back at Alpha Base, McKay watched Echo 136 wobble as a gust of wind hit the Pelican from the side, saw the ship gather speed and start to climb out. Echo 206 took off a few moments later, and both ships were gone within a matter of seconds. Her people knew what they were doing, so rather than make a pest of herself, McKay decided to wait and watch as the platoon leaders sorted things out. The officer felt the usual moments of fear, of self-doubt regarding her ability to accomplish the mission, but took comfort from something an instructor once told her. "Take a look around," the instructor had advised. "Ask yourself if there's anyone else who is better qualified to do the job. Not in the entire galaxy, but right here, at that point in time. If the answer is yes, ask them to accept command, and do everything you can to support. If the answer is no, which it will be 99% of the time, then take your best shot. That's all any of us can do." It was good advice, the kind that made a difference, and while it didn't erase McKay's fears, it certainly served to ease them. Master Sergeant Lister and Second Lieutenant Oros seemed to materialize out of the darkness. Oros had a small, pixie-like face which belied her innate toughness. If anything happened to McKay, Oros would take over, and if she bought the farm, Lister would step in. The battalion had been short of officers. Welcome back. Before the shit hit the fan, and what with Lieutenant Dalu, off-plane's supply officer, McKay was one platoon leader short of a full load. That's why Lister had been called upon to fill the hole. "Platoons 1 and 2 are ready to go," Oris reported cheerfully. Let us at 'em." "You want to raid the ship's commissary," McKay said, referring to the platoon leader's well-known addiction to chocolate. Sorry, I came back and my phone died immediately. LOL. Technology, eh? "No, ma'am," Oris replied innocently. "The lieutenant lives only to serve the needs of humanity, the Marine Corps, and the company commander." Even the normally stone-faced Lister had to laugh at that, and McKay felt her own spirits lift as well. "Okay, Lieutenant Oris, the human race would be grateful if you would put a couple of your best people on point and lead this outfit to the ship." I'll ride your 6 with Sergeant Lister and the 2nd Platoon walking drag. Are you okay with that? Both platoon leaders nodded and melted into the night. Mackay looked for the tail end of the 1st platoon, slid into line, and let her mind roam ahead. Somewhere, about 1 kilometre ahead, the Pillar of Autumn lay sprawled on the ground. The Covenant owned the ship for the moment, but Mackay was determined to take her back. It was time to get off the Truth and Reconciliation. As Covenant troops ran hither and yon, the recently freed Marines armed themselves with alien weapons, then linked up with the rest of the rescue team. Keyes and Cortana convened a quick council of war. While the Covenant had us locked up in here, I heard them talking about the Ringworld, Keyes said, and its destructive capabilities. One moment, sir, Cortana interrupted. I'm accessing the Covenant BattleNet. She paused as her vastly powerful intrusion protocols sifted through the Covenant systems. Information systems seemed to be the one field where human technologies held their own against those of the Covenant. Seconds later, she finished her sift of the alien data stream. If I'm interpreting the data correctly, they believe Halo is some kind of weapon, one that possesses vast, unimaginable power. Keyes nodded thoughtfully. The aliens who interrogated me kept saying that whoever controls Halo controls the fate of the universe. Now I see, Cortana put in thoughtfully. I intercepted a number of messages about a Covenant search team scouting for a control room. I thought they were looking for the bridge of the ship I managed during the battle above the ring, but they must be looking for Halo's control room. That's bad news, Keyes responded gravely. If Halo is a weapon, and the Covenant gains control of it, they'll use it against us. Who knows what power that would give them? Chief, Cortana, I have a new mission for you. We need to beat the Covenant to Halo's control room. No offense, sir, the Master Chief replied, but it might be best to finish this mission before we tackle another one. Keyes offered a tired grin. Good point, Chief. Marines, let's move. We should head back to the shuttle bay and call for evac, Cortana said, unless you'd like to walk home. No thanks, Keyes said. I'm Navy. We prefer to ride. The journey out of the detention area and back to the launch bay was hurry, but not quite as bad as the trip in. It wasn't long before they all realized that they really could follow the trail of dead bodies back to the launch bay. Sadly, some of the dead wore marine green, which served to remind the chief of how many humans the Covenant had murdered since the war had begun more than 25 years before. Somehow, in some way, the Covenant would be made to pay. The tactical situation was made even more risky by the captain's condition. He didn't complain, but the Spartan could tell that Keyes was sore and weak from the Covenant interrogation. It was a struggle for him to keep up with the others. The Master Chief signalled for the team to halt. Keyes, out of breath, favoured him with a sour look, but seemed grateful for the breather. 2 minutes later, the chief was about to signal the group to move forward when a trio of grunts scuttled into view. Needler rounds bounced from the bulkhead and angled right for him. His shields took the brunt of it, and he returned fire, as did the rest of the group. Keyes blew one grunt apart with a barrage of the explosive glassy needles. The rest were finished off by a combination of plasma rifle fire and the chief's assault rifle. Let's get moving, the Spartan advised. He took point and moved down the corridor, bent low and ready for trouble. He'd barely gotten 20 metres down the passageway when more Covenant moved in, 2 jackals and an elite. The enemy was getting closer and more determined the longer they remained. He finished off the jackals with his last frag grenade, then pinned the elite down with assault rifle fire. Keyes directed the Marines to fire on the alien's flank and went down. We need to go, sir, the chief warned Keyes. With respect, we're moving too slowly. Keyes nodded, and as a group they sprinted down the twisting passages, stealth abandoned. Finally, after numerous twists and turns, they reached the shuttle bay. The Spartan thought it was empty at first, until he noticed what appeared to be two light wands floating in mid-air. Fresh from his encounter with the stealth elite who had been stationed in the brig, the Master Chief knew better than to take his chances. He drew his pistol, linked in the scope, and took careful aim. He squeezed the trigger several times and put half a clip into the area just to the right of the energy blade. A Covenant warrior faded into view and toppled off the platform. A Marine yelled, "Watch it!" and "Cover the captain," as the second blade sliced the air into geometric shapes and started to advance as if on its own. The Spartan put 3 quick bursts into the second alien, hit his stealth generator, and the elite was revealed. Fire poured in from all sides, and the warrior went down. There was a blast of static as Cortana activated the Mjolnir's communication relays. Cortana to Echo 419. We have the captain and need extraction on the double. The reply was nearly instantaneous. Negative, Cortana. I have a flock of banshees on my tail, and I can't seem to shake them. You'll be better off finding your own ride. Acknowledged, Fohammer. Cortana out. The radio clicked as Cortana switched from the suit's radio to its external speakers. Our support is cut off, Captain. We'll need to hold here until Fohammer can move in. A Marine heard the interchange and, already traumatized by the time spent as a Covenant prisoner, began to lose it. We're trapped. We're all going to die. Stow the belly-aching soldier, Keyes growled. Cortana, if you and the Chief can get us into one of those Covenant dropships, I can fly us out of here. Yes, Captain, the AI replied. There's a Covenant ship docked below. The Master Chief saw the nav indicator appear on his HUD, followed the arrow through a hatch, down a series of corridors, and out into a troop ship bay. Unfortunately, the bay was well defended, and another fight broke out. The situation was getting worse. The Chief slammed his last full clip into the MA5B and fired short, controlled bursts. Grunts and jackals scattered and returned fire. The ammo counter dropped rapidly. A pair of grunts fell. Under the Spartan's hail of fire. Within seconds, the ammo counter read 00 empty. He tossed the rifle away and drew his pistol and continued firing at the alien forces that had begun to regroup at the far side of the bay. If we're going, he called out, we need to go now. The dropship was shaped like a giant U. It rode a grav field and bobbed slightly as some of the outside air swirled around it. As they approached it, Keyes said, "Everybody mount up, let's get on board," and led the Marines through an open hatch. The Spartan waited until everyone else had boarded and backed into the aircraft just in time. He was down to a single round in his sidearm. Cortana said, "Give me a minute to interface with the ship's controls." Keyes shook his head. "No need. I'll take this bird up myself." "Captain," one of the Marines called. "Hunters." The Master Chief peered out through the nearest viewport and saw the private was correct. Another pair of massive aliens had arrived on the loading platform and were making for the ship. Their spines stood straight up. Their fuel rod guns were swinging into position, and they were about to fire. "Hang on," Keyes said, as he disengaged the ship's gravity locks, brought the ship up over the edge of the platform, and pushed one of 2 joysticks forward. The twin hulls straddled a column, struck both hunters with what appeared to be glancing blows, and withdrew. Even a glancing blow from a ship that weighs thousands of kilos proved to be a serious thing indeed. The dropship's hull crushed the hunter's chest armor and forced it through their body cavities, killing both of them instantly. One corpse somehow managed to attach itself to one of the twin bows. It fell as the dropship cleared the Truth and Reconciliation's hull. The Master Chief leaned back against the metal wall. The Covenant craft's troop bay was cramped, uncomfortable, and dimly lit, but it beat the hell out of wandering through one of their cruisers. He braced himself as Keyes put the alien aircraft into a tight turn and accelerated out into the surrounding darkness. He forced his shoulders to relax and closed his eyes. The captain had been rescued, and the Covenant had been put on notice. The humans were determined to be more than an annoyance. They were going to be a major pain in the ass. Dawn had just started to break when Zuka's Zamami and Yaya passed through the newly reinforced perimeter that surrounded the gravity lift and were forced to wait while a crew of hard-working grunts pulled a load of Covenant dead off the blood-splattered pad before they could step onto the sticky surface and be pulled up into the ship. Although the Truth and Reconciliation's commanding officer believed that all of the surviving humans had left the ship, there was no way to be certain of that without a compartment-by-compartment check. The shipboard sensors read clear, but this raid had demonstrated beyond a doubt that the humans had learned how to trick Covenant detection gear. The visitors could feel the tension as teams of grim-faced elites, jackals and grunts performed a deck-by-deck search of the ship. As the pair made their way through the corridors to the lift that would carry them up to the command deck, Zamami was shocked by the extent of the damage that he saw. Yes, there were long stretches of passageway that were completely untouched, but every now and then they would pass through a gore-streaked section of corridor where bullet-pocked bulkheads, plasma-scorched decks, and half-slagged hatches told of a hard-fought running gun battle. Zamami stared in wonder as the graft cart loaded with mangled jackals was towed past, blood dripping onto the deck behind it. Finally, they made their way to the appropriate lift and stepped out onto the command deck. The elite expected the same level of security scrutiny as the last time he addressed the Prophet and Council of Masters. No doubt he'd be dumped into the holding room for another interminable wait. Nothing could have been further from the truth. No sooner did Zamami clear security than he and Yaya were whisked into the compartment where the Council of Masters had been convened during his last visit. There was no sign of the Prophet or any of Zamami's immediate superiors, but the hard-working Soha Rolami was there, along with a staff of lesser elites. There was no mistaking the crisis atmosphere as reports flowed in, were evaluated and used to create a variety of action plans. Rolami saw Zamami and raised his hand by way of a greeting. "Welcome, please sit." Zamami complied. It didn't occur to either one of the elites to offer the same courtesy to Yayab, who continued to stand. The diminutive grunt rocked back and forth, ill at ease. "So," Rolami inquired, "how much have you heard about the latest incursion?" "Not much," Zamami was forced to admit. The humans managed to board the ship via the gravity lift. That's the extent of my knowledge." "That's correct in so far as it goes," Rolami agreed. "There is more. The ship's security system recorded quite a bit of the action. Take a look at this." The elite touched a button and moving images popped into view and hovered in the air nearby. Zamami found himself looking at two grunts and a jackal standing in a corridor. Suddenly, without warning, the same human he had encountered on the Pillar of Autumn, the large one with the unusual armour, stepped around the corner, spotted the Covenant troops, and opened fire on them. The grunts went down quickly, but the jackals scored a hit, and Zamami saw plasma splash the front of the human's armour. However, rather than fall as he should have, the apparition shot the jackal in the head, stepped over one of the dead grunts, and marched toward the camera. The image froze as Rolami touched another control. Zamami felt an almost unbelievable tightness in his chest. Would he have the courage to face the human again? He wasn't sure, and that frightened him as well. So, Rolamy said, there he is, the very human you warned us about, a dangerous individual who is largely responsible for the 60 casualties inflicted during this raid alone, not to mention the loss of a valuable prisoner and 6 shades which the enemy managed to steal. And the humans, Zamami inquired, how many of them were our warriors able to kill? The body count is incomplete, the other elite replied, but the preliminary total is 36. Zamami was shocked. The numbers should have been reversed. Would have been reversed had it not been for the alien in the special armor. You will be pleased to learn that your original request has now been approved, Rolamy continued. We have preliminary reports from other strike groups that most of these unusual humans were killed in the last large engagement. This one is believed to be the last of his kind. Take whatever resources you need, find the human and kill him. Do you have any questions? No, Excellency, Zamami said as he stood to leave. None at all. And that's the end of chapter 3. Next is section 3, the silent cartographer, which was level 4 in the game. Chapter 5 is next. Oh. Right, so I've read the prologue, chapter 1, chapter 2, 3, and 4. So chapter 5 is next. So I'll continue that next time. So yeah, that was good. I'm gonna stop the stream now and take a break, and then I'll be if I'm not tired later, I'll be back on later tonight, and I'll continue with chapter 5 and 6, and then yeah, so after chapter 6 we'll be like halfway through it. So let's just glance over what's remaining. So so there's chapter 5. So the silent cartographer, section 3, the silent cartographer. It's got chapter 5. Chapter 6. Chapter 7. And then section 4, 343, Guilty Spark. Chapter 8. Chapter 9. And then section 5, 2 Betrayals. Chapter 10. Chapter 11, which is back to the truth and acceleration. Then section 6, the Maw, chapter 12, which is the final chapter. So of course the final chapter is the final level, which is, so the final level is, if you've played the game, is is the Escape, is the one with, it's basically the race. Yeah, and I think I'll stop and get some breakfast and lunch. My nieces will be in after school, so they'll be here till like 5 o'clock or so, and then once they're gone, I'll probably have dinner, and then I'll probably start the stream again and do the next two chapters. But yeah, we're making progress, and then once Halo, I finished reading Halo, I'll go back to playing Star Wars. So yeah, so so I have to say in each video that in each stream that if anybody likes the story and they want to support the author, you can use Google or whatever to find the book and like buy it from like Amazon or a local bookstore or whatever. So it's called Halo the Flood. So yeah. So I'll continue reading later. So thanks for watching. I'll be back on soon. Either later or tomorrow. And yeah, should be good. Alright. Thanks for watching and good night. Or good morning, since it's like after 8 o'clock in the morning here. So yeah. Yep. Good night. Good morning. Madnwa.